We'll call the meeting to order. I have the thumbs up from our IT people that live stream is up and running, so that's good. Doreen Lloyd is not well today, so she won't be attending. Is there any items on today's agenda that give rise to pecuniary interest or conflict of interest? There's no indication of such, so we'll note that in the minutes. And item number 2, agenda adoption to approve the agenda. Councillor Chapman.
I'll move to accept the agenda as presented.
Okay, any discussion? Call the question, all in favor? That's carried. Then we have 3.1 special council meeting minutes of November 5th. Councillor Chapman.
Move for acceptance.
Okay, any discussion? I'll call the question. All in favor? That's carried unanimously as well. And 3.2, regular council meeting minutes of November 9th, 2020. Councillor Simpson, you moved the minutes as circulated. Okay, any discussion? Call the question, all in favor? That's carried, thank you. So we have a delegation tonight. We have Tim Jans, President of Coaldale Handy Ride. So welcome, Tim. We have your information in our package as well. So I'll turn the floor over to you.
Thank you very much, Mayor Craig. Thanks to all of you, Mayor, Councillors, Administration, for allowing me to present an update about the operations of the Coaldale Handy Ride Association. I want to take this opportunity to thank you all so very much for your support throughout 2020. The monthly funding of $3,500 has allowed us to continue to offer services to vulnerable individuals within our community. We started out the year with strategic planning sessions. We had representatives from Alberta government come in and facilitate discussions with our board of directors. Very worthwhile endeavor. Had some really good discussion. We were really hopeful taking operations to the next level. We were going to expand our base, our ridership, and generally have even stronger financial operations. We even developed a new expanded mission statement that was going to guide our future planning to provide safe, reliable, affordable transportation for all seniors and individuals with mobility challenges. And that's a slight change, we've tended to focus previously on age or disability as opposed to individuals with any sort of mobility challenge. And we saw that as possibly a way to expanding our ridership base. And then COVID pretty much threw our plans out the window. But after a bit of a shutdown at the end of March and throughout April, we regrouped and began to get back to kind of what is our core business and what does the town of Coaldale or its residents need us to be. Our monthly ridership has been down significantly from previous years because basically people aren't traveling if it isn't a necessity. But we were able to contact kind of our regular riders and any different organizations that refer people to us, that we were up and running. We were taking appropriate precautions regarding masking, distancing, sanitizing the bus between rides. We were willing to get people to their appointments as required. Our drivers were amenable to being available every day, but only being paid on the days that they actually drove someone somewhere. As a result, we've taken riders where they needed or wanted to go, and you'll see most of those rides are to Lethbridge. As COVID has been, our stats go to the end of October, so they don't kind of deal with this latest uptick. But most of the rides are for medical appointments in Lethbridge. Our riders would not have been able to get there without our service. Ironically, our profit and loss is quite strong, partly due to your generous support, but also our fuel costs are down. Our maintenance costs are down. Our labor costs are down because, well, bus didn't run as often. But I can say anyone that needed an appointment or needed a ride got one. And I think we're pretty proud of that, and we're proud of our drivers for taking that view of operations. That if somebody needed a ride, we would be there to give them that ride. Our next steps for 2021 and beyond are to continue what we're currently doing, but also to begin on our new mission statement by marketing ourselves to the broader community of Coaldale area. We want people to know we're still operating and providing this much needed service. We plan to use some social media channels, likely Facebook, connect with some larger groups. Perhaps the town of Coaldale could boost our pages, Coaldale Chamber of Commerce. There's a large buy and sell group. Our goal is we want to get people to know that we're still offering this service, even if they themselves maybe don't need the service. We'll do some press release work for the Sunny South News and maybe some articles for insert items like the town of Coaldale's utility bills, those sorts of newsletters. We'll investigate the development of a simple website that people could access more about the bus service, maybe downloading fee schedule or the application forms. Because we do an assessment whenever someone takes their first ride. We want to establish them as a client and understand how they fit what we offer. The goal is just to get people to know more about us. Finally, we're going to continue to investigate ideas of providing opportunities to advertise via a wrap on the bus itself. One idea that our board is contemplating is to have the first wrap highlight the new downtown of Coaldale. We think it could be a way to thank the town for their support, but also have a billboard that supports our town. A billboard that drives down Highway 3 and the streets of Coaldale several times each weekday. Our board would request that you continue the current level of support for 2021 to allow us to continue this valuable service to the community. And now I'm open to any questions that you might have.
Tim, on behalf of myself and council, I want to thank you and your board for stepping into the breach and revitalizing the handy ride, because it was kind of transition from one board to another, and I think a lot of you fine people stepped up and took the challenge on, and it looks like you did a very enviable job, and if COVID wouldn't have interfered with things, your grand ideas might have taken root in that, but I appreciate your report.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments through to Tim?
Yeah, thank you, Worship. And I just want to echo again what your comments, as well as my support for the Handy Ride Association. Of course, it's been a great not only experience, but it's been rewarding to be able to see our board members engage and participate in training exercises, which are more about governance and about the operations of the service. And I think that as we move forward, we certainly want to ensure that our community stands by this and really build on the public element of this service to our community.
Other members of council with a question or comment? Well, you get off lightly tonight.
Yeah, I would be remiss if I didn't tell you about some significant people. I will say that Mike Hogel is our main driver, and maybe even for the organization, not just the bus. He really stepped into the kind of the breach and has been a very calming and stabilizing influence on the operations side. Harley Packer also serves as a driver for us. And the last person that really has made a profound difference for us as a board is Lou Weens. Has been volunteering her time as our bookkeeper. And, you know, I really can't express how important it is that we have records that we can share with you on a timely basis. I guess my belief is if someone is funding you and making an investment in you, you need to show them. You know, the information might not look as nice every time, right? There will be months where it's tougher than maybe the revenue-wise than months, but that's our or my commitment at least, that if you're giving us money, you have to have information. Lou's made that possible. So I think we really do want to thank those people for their willingness to do that work. So, and thank you for your investment in us. And if any time you need information, Councillor Chapman knows how to get a hold of me. We're happy to come back and report and speak more.
Right, Kalen, you have a comment or?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor, through the chair, and hi, Tim. Your comment about a billboard to advertise our town, do you have a little bit more detail or some specific ideas that you guys were thinking with respect to that?
Well, I think there's a lot of real estate on a bus, probably easily on the back end of it or on either of the sides. Basically, what we are told is that you can have a wrap made of pretty much any picture that you want to take. So if you had a nice profile picture of the new layout of downtown and something of, you know, come visit the new Coaldale or come, you know, visit new Main Street. I think you also could potentially have a picture of the new development that's going to happen. You know, I think you announced the project for the new town hall and commercial development. And really, I think we've looked at pricing. I can't remember, but I know it was under $5,000. I thought it was about $3,500. You remember, Bill?
Through the chair, thank you, Tim. I think it'd be less than 1,000 if I remember, but that might be just the back end of the bus, so it might be on a square footage.
I may be mistaken. We did get a quote from one place on it. We'd have to expand on that. But the idea would be that someone would make the investment, you know, and it can be on the bus for 6 months to a year. You know, I think the only time you'd change it if somebody else said they wanted to do it. So I can dig up that information from a past meeting and get it back. I thought it was a little more than that, but my memory is not as good as it used to be. COVID,
And,
apparently.
well, money will buy you anything, but I'm sure that it's on a square foot basis, and it's something that is not only achievable, but I think I was surprised is somewhat affordable, and especially if there's sponsors involved, it even becomes even that more achievable.
Thank you, Your Worship. I thank you for everything that you've brought forward today to us. And I love that moving bulletin board idea. The one thing I just want to make sure, I know administration's always working with you guys, but I do want to make sure that we're putting it out onto our social media, anything that you need. So if there's ever extra advertising you need, I think that's something that the town should move forward with helping you guys with that.
And indeed, that offer has been made. I think it's been more of a misfire from us of generating the content. I guess personally, I've been hesitant to make the town's Facebook page the resting place. I think it can stand on its own, but certainly if we do that, the town can boost just because they have so many more followers than we would have. But I think that I'm reluctant to force the town to have it reside on their Facebook page. So maybe that's just my fault, but we'll get there.
Good. Well, barring any other questions or whatnot, again, please do convey our special gratitude to the folks that you mentioned tonight, and it is greatly appreciated having timely financial statements and the ridership riding, and that information that validates the ongoing contribution of the town. So that's greatly appreciated, and it lends a lot of credibility and transparency to the whole interaction between the two organizations. So all the best in moving forward, and keep up the good work.
All right, thank you. Hopefully you guys don't have too long an evening.
Thanks, Tim. Okay, and then a motion to receive that for information. Councillor Simpson, all in favor? Okay, and then we're just readying the stage for 5.1, and Spencer, do you want to give us the intro then?
Sure, thank you, Mayor, and good evening to you and Council. If I may, we just need a couple of minutes. We have some consultants here who have helped us with this project substantially, so if I may, we'll just have them come in and set up. We'll be ready to go in just a few minutes.
Okay.
Okay, thank you for your patience, Mayor and Council. With me this evening, I have Nikki Birkinshaw and Bruce Nelligan from Watt Consulting Group. It'll be a bit of a combined effort given their participation with the technical side of the document, some of the cost estimates and other engineering related matters. So with that, I'll lead in. And before we start, I should note as well that what we have this evening is the staff presentation that would have been a part of the agenda package, and then we've combined the couple of slides that Watt is going to be speaking to as well. So it's one presentation with their piece included now. Okay, so work on the Transportation Master Plan began in 2018. Community consultation and transportation planning work were undertaken in the last quarter of 2018 and the beginning of 2019. And due to a number of technical challenges with modeling and a few other outcomes, work on the master plan was delayed briefly between 2019 and 2020. Work on the plan was finalized through a combined effort between the town and Watt Consulting Group, primarily working with Nikki and Bruce, who I've already introduced. Watt Consulting Group prepared a network analysis and related cost estimates, and the transportation planning work was completed by the town and double-checked by Watt. So just a very brief overview of the document itself. Pages 3 to 13 in the document are essentially the background and plan principles. So that includes community context, definable contextual areas, the idea of integrating land use planning or land use and transportation planning, and a brief discussion on the transportation hierarchy as well. The goals, policies, strategies, and actions are all intended to be SMART, and that is specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and time-based. So those are found on pages 14 to 23 of the document. The primarily technical work of the network analysis and cost estimates can be found on pages 24 to 78, and then the implementation plan is available on pages 79 to 83. So in terms of community context, through various activities and events, the community has provided substantial feedback on how best to approach network changes and management of the transportation network in Coaldale. Aside from specific master plan activities, other projects and engagement opportunities have been considered in the shaping of this plan. As you may have noticed in the recent past with activities such as the town plan and other projects that we've worked on, we tend to look more broadly at the more substantial feedback that all of our communication and engagement with the community represents, versus just looking at one singular source of discussion on one particular plan, because we get a more comprehensive sense of what may be desired by the community by looking more broadly at the feedback we are getting. So we have looked at consultation carried out as part of the town plan, past community conversations on areas such as 30th Avenue, and strategic alignment with enhancements the community has desired, such as the expansion of the town's pathways network, much of the work which was carried out this summer. And now with the 4 points we have on the screen, I won't read them out verbatim, but they represent the 4 key components of feedback that we did receive as a part of the master plan engagement, and some of the other feedback we were able to pull from the engagement results from other activities and other projects that we've been undertaking recently. Of particular note is the idea of developing goals and objectives of this plan based on a broader set of guiding principles and considerations rather than just cost or saving time, because transportation planning is a bigger discussion than just cost and time. So that's been worked into the document, as well as looking at smaller operational strategies versus larger umbrella goals and objectives. There's also quite a substantial focus, as there has been with other projects, on the idea of maintaining Coaldale's character as the transportation network changes and grows. And that's particularly focused on maintaining the what we know as the small town feel of the community. We have made use of context areas in the master plan. So map 1 in the plan, which we'll see on the next slide, represents, rather than thinking of a one-size-fits-all approach for the whole community, it represents a focus on looking at the specific desired outcomes in the different areas of character in the community, whether that's our downtown, which we've already spent substantial time working on over this summer, established areas, so the older parts of the community, our suburban neighborhoods, the industrial area, transitional area, or the fringe. So in terms of, we're going backwards here. So in terms of what that looks like on a map, what we have is in the red rectangle, we have our downtown primarily. And then in the yellow areas, that's our established area. So that's primarily going to be a conventional grid pattern or gridded street network. Yes, that is established. The fringe area is gray, and the fringe is primarily made up of all of those lands that were part of our 2018 annexation. Pink is industrial in the northeast, as we all know. And then transitional is areas that are currently underdeveloped or undeveloped in accordance with an existing statutory or non-statutory plan, but that are going to be developed at some point in the future. And very briefly, we're just touching here on the idea of integrating land use planning and transportation engineering and transportation planning. So the phrase that's commonly used nowadays is integrated land use and transportation planning. Instead of looking at the image on the left and just saying it's an agricultural use, we're just going to treat everything around it as though it's intended for agriculture. Or if we're only looking at a roadway as a roadway and not looking at the surrounding uses, everything's going to look like a nail. So instead of taking that approach, we're looking at areas in context, and in the context of the impact that transportation has on land use and the impact that land use has on transportation. In the document, we also briefly cover the transportation hierarchy. So on the left-hand side of the screen, we have what would be considered in the past a conventional hierarchy. That's placing the single occupancy vehicle as the top of the pyramid, as it were. So the primary focus of moving vehicles safely and comfortably was generally the way of the past. And nowadays, the image on the right certainly isn't to say that we're only going to focus on pedestrians or active modes users, but we're looking at more of a balanced perspective moving forward. And that's not just here in Coaldale, that would be industry-wide in the transportation planning world. There's more of a focus on balancing the needs of all users of a network versus placing one need over another. And again, that's all in context. Certainly, we're going to look at commercial vehicle movement in an industrial area or near a highway, and you might look at people movement more around schools and established neighborhoods. So again, it's focusing on the idea that we can look at things in context versus a road as a road, and everything else around it just has to adapt to what that road represents. The master plan is organized in a way that allows for increasing levels of specificity and detail. So we have directive statements, directive broad statements with our goals and policies, and we have actionable specific statements with our strategies and actions. As already mentioned, the primary focus of the goals, policies, strategies, and actions is to make sure that they're SMART. So they are specific where possible, they're measurable where possible, which helps with implementation. They're achievable, relevant, and time-based. So here now we have the 5 overarching goals of the plan as based on feedback and community consultation and best practices from a transportation perspective. So first and foremost, we have an effective and efficient network. They're prioritizing active modes, and that was certainly heard throughout the feedback that was collected through this and other activities, and realized through a lot of the pathways expansion that has gone on this year. Next, we have comfort and safety for all users. So again, the idea of balancing the needs of the transportation hierarchy. We have create memorable streets and places, which we're focusing on with areas such as Main Street, and we also have proactive community involvement. So next, there's just a bit of a roadmap in terms of how the policies relate to the goals and which pages of the master plan we can find these policies on. So what we've done and how we've organized the goals, policies, strategies, and actions is in a very linear fashion, in the sense that the first set of goals, 1 to 9, relate directly to, or sorry, policies 1 to 9 relate directly to the first goal. And the second goal relates to policies 11 and 12, and so on and so forth. So they're very much tied to, we have specific actionable ways of getting from goal to action, which is important to be able to reasonably achieve the tenets of the plan. And we also have a list of tools or activities in our implementation section and throughout the actions and strategies. So very briefly, in the goal of an effective and efficient network, policies 1 to 9, we have tools and activities such as basing decisions on asset management principles, which look more holistically at how decisions should be made short and long term from an operational and a benefit perspective. We also look at proactively identifying budget impacts for desired and required changes to the network. We look at the development of transportation impact assessment guides for new development, unifying our transportation master plan focus with what we already have in the town plan in terms of transportation focus in those two documents, so that we're not inconsistent in what we're asking for from developers in the community. And if we look at prioritizing active modes, we of course want to focus on safer, more comfortable crossings, developing pathways and pathways design standards, so that our own pathways are linked up with pathways in new development built by developers that are of the same width and pavement depth and things like that. So we know how and when and where things will connect in the most consistent way possible. We also look at undertaking accessibility analysis, and I'm happy to report that that will be on the agenda of the accessibility working group, which council gave life to in the last meeting. So that'll be one of the first things from a grassroots perspective that that group can focus on. Next, we have comfort and safety for all users. So we talk about traffic calming guides, focusing on our continued efforts around safe and active routes to school, developing and implementing a parking strategy, and installing community wayfinding signage, which we already have in process as a part of the pathways expansion from this summer. And we want to look at creating memorable streets and places. So we use our streetscapes as amenities instead of just to move vehicles. We look at them as creating an experience for all modes of users who may travel through that space. And again, the best example we have now is the Main Street area. And then with the last goal, we have the idea of proactive community involvement. And I really do want to highlight that throughout the policies, strategies, and actions in this document, the idea of proactively involving community in discussions and debate and thinking through some of the ways that the network has to change is really one of the key areas of focus for this document. So anything that's done in a transportation related focus that fits within the different policies and goals and objectives of the document is done in a way that's going to be proactive, whether that's from an educational and informational perspective, or whether it's from a perspective of having to have discussions with stakeholders before a network change takes place. And next we have network analysis. So I won't touch on this too much because we have the experts here who are much more adept at speaking to the network analysis than I am. I will just note that map 2 on page 26 of the master plan itself, which I'll bring up on the screen now, essentially represents the core areas of focus that Nikki and Bruce are going to be taking us through over the next couple of slides. So with that, I'm certainly happy to take questions on the first half, although I would suggest if we can get to the end of the presentation, it might be more comprehensive in the sense that some of your questions may be answered through the rest of the presentation. So if I may, I'm going to hand it off to the consultants at this time.
Through you, Mayor Craig. So thank you for having us this evening. My name is Nikki Birkinshaw, and I'm a transportation engineer with this, I almost said the city of Red Deer. My apologies. Still getting used to saying that I'm with Watt Consulting Group. And also today with us is Bruce Nelligan, who is Watt's president. So as you're aware, Watt has been retained to complete the network analysis for Coaldale's Transportation Master Plan. Some of this will be a refresher from the last presentation that I understood you saw. However, as that was part of a larger workshop, I won't be going into the same level of detail. Today I'll provide a general overview of the network analysis and focus on the recommended improvements at each of the analysis horizons. Okay. The scope of the work included incorporating the town of Coaldale in more detail into the Lethbridge Regional Transportation Model, which Watt constructed and operates, and to provide analysis at future 5- and 10-year horizons. The analysis included looking at several different road configurations and options to determine what would be the most optimal infrastructure plan as growth happens within the town. I want to first start by giving a brief overview of the model we used and how it was constructed, as that forms the basis of our recommendations. So we used a software called Vizoom, which is an industry-leading network modeling software that offers powerful analytic data mimicking human behavior on a constructed virtual road network. So first we break the area into zones, which are then assigned population and employment information. These numbers are determined through real-world data for existing horizons, such as census information. And for future horizons, we worked with your planning staff to develop appropriate projections based on policy and development plans. Each zone is populated with the type of planned land use, and then it's assigned an anticipated build-out by the development horizon. So at the 5-year horizon, one section may only have 75% of development occurred, but then by the 10-year horizon, it would be 100% built out. So each zone is addressed in that way. We then use available GIS data to construct the road network and model the areas that the zones are connected to. The links, so all the lines shown in the tiny picture on the screen, within the model are all coded to represent the real-world attributes that they have as a road. So the number of lanes, the speed, the traffic control, etc. The model is then run through multiple iterations to ensure consistent and repeatable results, and calibrated against existing traffic data to ensure that future projections represent realistic representations. So there's an existing conditions model, and as that's run, it's compared against actual traffic counts to see if that model is representing the reality, and to ensure that it's not suppressing data in some areas or sending traffic down an illogical route. So it's an iterative process until you have that established model, and then that's used to move forward. The model assigns travel between zones based on an origin-destination matrix, and the trips will generally take the shortest path. much like we as drivers like to do. When that shortest path becomes congested, the model will then reassign traffic to take the fastest path, even if it's a little bit longer, which again represents how people will generally behave. If there's a route you like to drive and now it's not comfortable because it's taking you longer, you might drive a little longer one that takes you less time. So that's the network model provides traffic volumes along each of the roadways and turning movements at each of the intersections within it. And this model's been built for the PM peak, so your afternoon peak hour, because generally the afternoon rush hour is your busier time of day, so it represents a more conservative analysis. A micro-simulation software, which is called Synchro, is then used to evaluate each of the individual intersections and determine a level of service that it's operating at. Level of service is generally described as a letter grade, A through F, with A being the best and F being just like grade school, where it wasn't very good. And what's considered acceptable performance is usually quite context specific. So in downtown Los Angeles, you know, traffic's going to operate at a level of service F or potentially beyond, depending on the roadway. And that would be acceptable. But that's not going to be acceptable for a community like Coaldale, right? So within smaller communities, generally a level of service C is considered acceptable, with some individual movements perhaps operating at a D, but only on occasion, not all the time. Anything beyond a 35-second delay moves to a level of service E at an unsignalized intersection, and this is when drivers will start to perhaps make unwise choices as they are having to wait longer, they want to get going, where a level of service at a signalized intersection, they're given more time before it transitions to the level of service E, because drivers know when they're sitting at a traffic light, they're going to get the green light and they're going to be allowed to go. And so that's why the level of service thresholds are different for an unsignalized versus a signalized intersection. I won't be displaying results for every intersection. In fact, this is the only slide with these tables. In the report, there are more, but I just want to point out a few things. So when it comes to assigning the letter grades, your level of service, it's assigned for each individual movement. So your left turn, your straight through, and your right turn in each direction. And then an overall letter grade is also assigned to the intersection. But how that overall level of service is determined depends on a number of factors. So the bottom half of that chart shows 30th Street and Highway 3. You can see the east-west volumes at that intersection operate fantastic with no delays and no queues because it's a free-flow movement, right? There's no traffic control. North-south movements have some delay because people are waiting at the stop sign to be able to go safely. And there are some level of service Cs, which is still acceptable. But then when you look at the overall intersection, you can see that it's level of service A. And that's because on the highway itself, there's a higher volume of traffic that was experiencing the level of service A compared to the number of vehicles waiting on the side street. So that's where, even though your lowest individual movement was a C, the overall intersection, when you look at it, was still at an A. So that's what you'll see in some of the tables in the report. So with the existing network established, we then looked at what the future may hold for Coaldale. In order to do that, we worked closely with your administration to get a solid understanding of where growth is projected to occur. This includes all types, such as future industrial and employment lands, as well as future residential neighborhoods and schools. This growth was populated into the model's established zones, and traffic projections at each specific horizon were developed. Trip generation rates for the new growth was based on industry standard trip generation rates developed by the Institute of Transportation Engineers. These rates are determined by observing multiple developments of similar types across North America and establishing a statistically average rate. And so the ITE regularly updates their rates as they get more and more data over the years. On top of the new development, We also applied a 2% growth rate to the existing background traffic to take into account organic growth within Coaldale and the region. At each future horizon, we incorporate planned changes into the road network, such as new roadways. At the 2024 horizon, the 16th Avenue extension, which is planned to extend west of 30th Street as development occurs, has been included in the model. Two scenarios for 16th Avenue were considered. The first scenario assumed that 16th Avenue would continue as a straight road and connect with 30th Street at a single intersection. The second scenario assumed 16th Avenue would have a curvilinear design looping through the future community and connect with 30th Street at two separate locations. Both options are shown on the slide above. So the performance of both options were similar, and so it is recommended to plan for option 2, which is the multiple connections, as multiple points of connectivity will provide a more robust transportation network and provide residents with options as they look to choose their paths of travel. The recommended improvements for the 2024 or 5-year horizon include signalization at Highway 3 and 30th Street and improvements to Highway 3 and 20th Street. There are two options shown on the screen. So the potential for an additional northbound right turn lane, as well as the potential for a median extension. I am going to go into more details on that, but after the conclusion of the Transportation Master Plan presentation. So we'll be having a separate discussion on those improvements. We then analyzed the 10-year or 2029 horizon. The growth was projected out another 5 years, with again that same 2% background growth rate continued. The additional network changes at this horizon that were made to the road network included the extension of 12th Avenue from 8th Street to 20th Street and reconfiguration of the intersection of 18th Avenue and 20th Street to address the two offset T intersections and combining them into a single intersection. Another scenario that we were asked to analyze at the 2029 horizon was the connection of 13th Street north of 30th Avenue. The presence of the irrigation canal meant that two options were looked at due to the challenges associated, or to determine whether the challenges associated with the new canal crossing would be worth the benefit. The first option assumed a new east-west avenue would be constructed on the south side of the canal, connecting an extended 13th Street to 17th Street to take advantage of the existing canal crossing. The second option assumed a new canal crossing would be constructed and 13th Street would connect directly with itself, completing the missing link. Both options are illustrated above. Performance within the network as a whole is very similar for both options, as the volume of projected traffic using the link doesn't negatively impact the surrounding intersections or road network. So option 1, which includes the new east-west avenue, is recommended as being the lower cost option between the two. So this is partly due to the grade difference between the north side of the canal and the existing 13th Street. So there would be some challenges in constructing a crossing at that location. The recommended improvements for the 2029 or 10-year horizon include constructing a roundabout at Land O'Lakes Drive and 21st Avenue, and signalization at 20th Street and 18th Avenue. So I just want to quickly highlight a few benefits of roundabouts compared to traditional intersection configurations such as traffic signals. So the first is safety. With roundabouts compared to a signalized intersection, there are less points of conflict between not only vehicles with one another, but also between vehicles and pedestrians. So with less points of conflict, the inherent safety of the intersection increases, as well as the design of roundabouts includes reducing speed as vehicles enter the circulating roadway, so that again increases the safety of the intersection. Operational benefits include lower delays for motorists and shorter queue lengths. So compared to signalization, you'll generally be able to handle a higher volume of traffic over a longer period of time as they're able to move traffic efficiently. With the delays as well, this is particularly beneficial to motorists off-peak when, rather than sitting on the side street waiting for the traffic light to turn green to let them onto the main road, you're able to go without waiting if there's no opposing traffic. Oh, and apparently I skipped ahead on myself. So higher capacity compared to traffic signals, so being able to handle higher traffic volumes. Reduced fuel consumption and greenhouse gas emissions. So again, that relates to not idling while you're sitting waiting for the traffic light, because you only have to come to a complete stop if someone is directly in front of you. Otherwise, you yield and continue around without the same level of idling. Lower maintenance costs, as you're not powering traffic signals throughout the year. And they have the option, depending on the size and needs of the location, there's the potential for center median landscaping, which can be aesthetically pleasing as well. So, the improvements that were identified to accommodate future growth are summarized on this slide. As part of our scope, we worked with your staff to determine preliminary cost estimates for each project, with the cost listed up on the screen. And I'll just quickly read through them. So for 30th Street signal at 2024, $700,000. And these are high-level rounded cost estimate. Right? 20th Street northbound right turn lane, $116,000. 18th Avenue and 20th Street signals, $563,000. 21st Avenue and Land O'Lakes roundabout, $840,000. And then the network expansions included the 16th Avenue expansion, which is estimated at $1.13 million. 12th Avenue extension at $1.03 million, and the 13th Street extension at $1.03 million. And just one final thought is where changes represent a major deviation from a current type of intersection. So for example, making the decision to go to a roundabout as your first roundabout in your community, it's very beneficial to undertake proactive communication and dialogue with the community and stakeholders. So this could be broad information for the community in the example of roundabouts about how to navigate a roundabout if not all of your residents are familiar with it. It can also be more targeted communications, such as communicating with your industrial businesses where they have truck drivers, because the roundabout is proposed to have a mountable truck apron to help trucks move through it. And so having that communication with them to remind them that that apron is there for them to drive. So it's not just the general, but there may be some targeted conversations to have with different people in the community as well. And with that, I will turn things back over to Spencer.
Spencer, can I say a few words as well?
Certainly.
Yeah. Mayor and Council, thanks for having us down here. Just wanted to add a little bit more to what Nikki was talking about, maybe just a general overview from my experience in dealing with towns of a similar size to Coaldale. You know, from the work that WAT has done in the network analysis, in general, most of your intersections are operating just fine. As the town grows, you've got some pretty aggressive growth plans for the town. There will be some improvements that will be required to help move traffic along. We've got some options that Nikki's going to discuss for the main intersection at Highway 3 and 845. But in general, like what we found is that a lot of the intersections are working fine. We really like what the town has done with the downtown. I think that's done a lot in terms of accommodating the businesses there and the parking and moving not just cars but pedestrians as well. So we like a lot of the things that council is doing, and our report just basically outlines some improvements that will be required as the town grows. So just wanted to add those sort of high-level comments on what I saw from a traffic perspective.
So as Bruce has just mentioned, in the next couple of items that are going to come forward this evening, we have a focus on the Highway 845, 3 and Main Street intersection that'll be discussed in more detail. And as well, we have ISL Engineering providing a project update for the Land O'Lakes and 21st Avenue intersection as well. I did want to highlight, in connection to the motion that was made in September 2018 regarding the 13th Street crossing, that is noted as an item that needs to be revisited once the Transportation Master Plan has been given consideration for approval, since that prior motion was connected to the successful completion of the TMP. And that's certainly something that staff will be focusing on once the TMP is considered for approval. I did want to highlight just very quickly again that right in the report itself, WAT does recommend the lower cost option of the two presented in the master plan as the preferred option, and that was heading north and then east towards 17th Street before reconnecting north of the canal. So just briefly to summarize, analysis and community stakeholder feedback has helped to inform the list of changes and enhancements noted in the Transportation Master Plan laid out and presented this evening. A number of items on the list represent options as to how to manage particular issues, such as those two items that will be coming up later on for further discussion. And for these types of items, dialogue with the community is certainly something that would need to be considered as a critical component of the success of any changes that occur in those areas. And that's, again, as highlighted and supported by the TMP through the policies that do focus on that community dialogue perspective. So part 4 is the last portion of the plan that we'll be presenting this evening. It's meant to provide a work plan that can be actioned over the next 3+ years. And that isn't to say from today to 3 years from now, but really it's a range of options in terms of the suggested priority for a lot of these projects. And I should just mention at this point that for all of the implementation items in that work plan that makes up part 4 of the document, it's suggested that a lot of that work look at being scheduled for and budgeted for beginning in 2022. WAT was also instrumental in providing estimated costs for a lot of the items in the work plan, so I just wanted to make that note and thank the consultants again for providing those numbers for us so that that can be helpful for us during discussions around budgeting and what's going to come first. So just very quickly, with the work plan that was put together, I don't have to read each of the items verbatim, but I will highlight each individual item just to give a contextual basis for what it is that we're asking and why. We do also have a helpful note at the bottom of each tool that we're suggesting be focused on in the sense that it aligns with a policy or a strategy that's right in the document itself. So the first is network changes and expansions decision-making matrix, and that ties to policy 2, which focused on making decisions based on an asset management perspective versus just cost or just driver delay or just one particular focus. And that would be considered relatively high priority. Next, we have items such as the development of a traffic impact assessment policy, which can help develop consistency with what we're receiving from developers when a large enough development occurs and we do need a TIA for a particular impact to the network. Those are typically also circulated to Alberta Transportation, especially given the size of the community. They effectively need to be circulated on all of those from now forward. So a consistent approach to TIAs can be a helpful way to create better context and discussion for how new neighborhoods fit into the community or changes in growth. We would also look at a traffic counting program and network model updates, annual plan review, and a 4-year major review. Again, that's focused on coinciding with the major review schedule suggested in the town plan to create a level of consistency and as a way of creating effectively buy-in and a deeper understanding of these larger guiding documents when each new council term starts from now forward. We're also looking at undertaking an accessibility audit. It indicates on the screen that that has not started, but again, that's something that can be added to, and I would suggest would be added to the work being done by the accessibility working group as a grassroots effort to begin with, and that may need some polish and refinement as we get further on in that process, but that's something that can be started in-house for little to no cost in the first phase of project efforts. We would also focus on a traffic calming guide, traffic control warrant analysis, continued efforts on our safe and active routes to school strategy, which is fairly low cost as compared to the benefit that we hope it provides to the students and parents of students in the community. And then we'd also look at, again, the wayfinding strategy is in process, and that may require additional dollars as we move forward from the pilot program that's being put in place this year and early next year. And we would also suggest a traffic sign and speed limit rationalization study, which is a technical way of saying looking at how they yield and stop in uncontrolled intersections throughout the existing community work or don't work, and making changes where necessary or where suggested. I think I'm one slide ahead. Okay, so we would also look at looking at a network connectivity analysis, a complete street strategy, and then a parking analysis and strategy as well at some point in the future. So with that, subsequent to the WAT presentation has been completed, so council, of course, may wish to consider one of the following options subsequent to any questions that you may have. Approval with or without changes of the master plan, or direction to staff and the consultant regarding any work that may be required to change any parts of the document that may not suit the needs of or the perspectives of council at this point. So with that, I will thank you for your patience, and I will speak for the consultants in this sense, and I'll offer that any three of us are open to any questions that you have at this time. Thank you.
Up for questions, either Spencer, Bruce, or Nikki. Councilor Avery.
Can you just again go over the 13th Street?
Through the chair to Councillor Avery, certainly. Just give me one moment here. It's a fair number of clicks back here. So the extension, and my apologies, Councillor Avery, are you thinking of the motion from 2018 or just the ultimate suggested outcome in terms of how it's approached?
The ultimate outcome, if we're accepting this report, are we accepting taking 13th Street through, or going 23rd, 17th, and then back over?
Well, I would suggest, through the chair to Councillor Avery, I would suggest at this time that this master plan is approved by resolution. So in something as substantial as the town plan, for instance, which is a statutory document, you still have opportunity to deviate from that plan if you so wish. So with a plan such as this, you're certainly, as far as I understand, not beholden to the exact suggested outcomes that are suggested in the document. However, if there is a deviation from what's been recommended by the consultants or in the plan itself, that would likely need additional scrutiny by staff and to be brought back to council for further discussion. I'm not sure if that fully answers your question or not.
Chapman.
Thank you, Worship. Just along with Councillor Avery's concept, I read that through a few times, particularly because that has been an issue, and it'll come back up again. So I would accept the document with the additional wording that the recommendation to go with that S kind of a usage, so that it's only serviceable from 17th Street, and avoiding going over the canal. I appreciate the fact that there is the two issues there. One is that the cost of going over the canal, number two being the grade at which would have to the street would have to be built. So I would be opposed to a straight through option for 13th Street. Could I speak to a couple of other points, Your Worship, or I'll just maybe I'll pass. I'll allow.
Councillor Holm.
Couple questions to the consultant, just to get my own mind going on the accuracy and stuff. So when you do the modeling and everything, can you give me an idea how many actual intersections you actually do traffic counts and actually stopwatch times? Is it every intersection that we have in there, or is it 2 or 3 of them and then everything is linearly extrapolated across? How exactly is that done? Just want to know how we're calibrating the model.
For you, Mayor Craig. I don't have the exact number of intersections, but if you refer, because the report was part of the agenda package, Table 2 lists all of the analyzed intersections that we looked at. So it tends to be your more main intersections, so along the provincial highways and your larger roads, but not your smaller local roads. So at quick glance, there's approximately 20 main intersections that were analyzed, plus or minus.
So those were actually analyzed as in somebody physically there taking traffic counts and stuff, or were they analyzed through the model?
So both. So if, through you, Mayor Craig, if there was existing traffic data at an Alberta transportation intersection, for example, they collect annual traffic data, and so that would have been used as the basis for existing. If it was a non-Alberta transportation intersection, then traffic counts would have been done to establish that existing model horizon, so your existing scenario. And then that same network is analyzed with the future traffic volumes. So you'd analyze those 20 intersections at each of the scenarios. So analyze them 3 times in total.
So, yeah, so perhaps just to add to that, the traffic counts were done at the intersections that were mentioned by Nikki, and the delays that we report are all theoretical, so that they're calculated by the software. When we do the counts, we're just looking at the volume, and then the software tells us sort of how long the average car will have to wait to get through that intersection.
Okay, fair enough. And then just one last follow-up then, just to, again, in my own mind. So when you do the future scenarios, do you then just take what staff have given you as our growth potential and just strictly linearly extrapolate that to 2029 population and then just multiply each intersection by that population?
So through you, Mayor Craig, there were 2 components to the growth of the community. One was looking at the overall development plans for the future. So your undeveloped lands, it's known whether it's going to be residential, industrial, commercial. And we worked with the planning staff to determine at each of the horizons how much of each of those areas of the town would be developed. So there was that component of that new growth area. And in addition to that, there was a 2% background growth to account for overall regional growth, not necessarily specific to growth within Coaldale.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. I just wanted to note, and correct me if I'm wrong, but one of the benefits of regularly updating the model is that it continues to be up to date over time. So we're not just assuming based on assumptions, based on assumptions, based on assumptions. So the model, spending a little bit of money to update it regularly helps keep it robust and relevant over time as well. Is that accurate?
Thank you. Councillor Chapman,
Yeah, thank you again, Your Worship. I noticed that you didn't speak to 20th Street and 20th Avenue in your presentation, although it's in the in this report. I'm very interested in your concepts leading to that and how that might be proposed for whether immediately or long term. I think that the idea behind it serves a purpose for a right-in, right-out sort of a concept. And I also noted to myself the 18th Avenue and 20th Street, the concept of developing a roundabout up there. And I'm quite opposed to that myself. But I also think that if we use the same model that we have that you're proposing for 20th Street and 20th Avenue, on that same model on 18th Avenue, that might be something more doable as well as a right-in, right-out concept.
If I may, Mayor. Thank you. Through the chair to Councillor Chapman. Excellent points. One of the reasons that we left the discussion around 20th and Highway 3 for the next item is because the transportation master plan is in and of itself substantially different focus than something that detailed. So we certainly knew that there was going to be additional focus on that particular intersection, which is why they're separate, and we'll definitely have more opportunity to discuss the details in the next item. On the 18th realignment on 845, again, correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm not certain that that was recommended for a roundabout. I believe that was just a realignment with signals.
Through the report, a roundabout and a signalized option were considered, but this signalized option is what's recommended due to the proximity of the rail crossing. So with the rail crossing being close, even with the realignment, there are opportunities to connect the signals as you have at the highway, along Highway 3, where signals will be preempted as trains come in. So you're able to not allow traffic to turn towards the rails when that train is coming through and creating blockages. So both options were looked at, and from a theoretical moving traffic capacity perspective, a roundabout would function, but because of the proximity to the rail, and there would also be complications with the access to the existing business as well and such right in the corner of a roundabout. So we did suggest that the signals would be the preferred option.
Councillor Simpson?
Thank you, Your Worship. So I have two questions. First of all, I know we've done a lot of public engagement on this. Do we have a number of how much public engagement we've done on this?
Councillor Simpson, this was done a couple of years ago. Most of it was intercept surveys, visits with the schools, and then other related matters. So between the focused efforts on the transportation master plan, there was a night at the Gem Museum, for instance, and a preliminary workshop at the community center a couple of years back, focusing on the idea of asset management principles and things like that. Our best estimate is about 400 different voices lent specifically to discussion on this item. And then when we factor in all of the other engagement feedback that was considered as part of other projects, that would be increased substantially from there.
Thank you. So there's been quite a bit. The other question I have is, so when you're considering the future growth, do you actually take those areas and kind of guess where the roads are going to be, and that's where the future growth, like to get the traffic, it might start directing on a different way from this area with future growth if it's residential or commercial?
So they'll generally look at the connection points onto the road network, because the model doesn't analyze all of the smaller local roads that will come forward as your development plans solidify over time. We'll look at where those connection points onto your collector, or if a new collector is planned. So that's where we added in some of those additional network extensions at each of the horizons. So it considers the larger roads, and then traffic through the model kind of finds its way through the town, but it doesn't model all of the small roads or dictate that level of detail.
Any further questions of our guests at this time?
Let me ask one final question on option 1 and 2 for 16th Avenue North. You've spoken to it in your presentation. Would that be able to serve as a bit of a ring road egress or exit from the north, or entrance from the north to 30th Street and Highway 3?
Go ahead, Spencer.
Thank you, Mayor. Sorry, Councillor Chapman, could you repeat the question?
I was just thinking about option 1 particularly. I'm more in favor of option 1, I guess, from just looking at it now. But whether that road would be more of a throughway, where it would be almost like a ring road to the west of 20th Street eventually.
Certainly, it's, through the chair to Councillor Chapman, it's really a matter of context and detail. So as we gather more details as to what the neighborhood to the west of the wetlands and school site and recreational site look like, we'll have more of an understanding of exactly how that network should and could best connect to 30th. So really at that point, it'll be a matter of understanding those finer grain details. As of right now, as far as I understand it, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, but the multiple points of access from the major north-south road can be better managed. Multiple points of access can provide traffic dispersion or the ability for all of the traffic from a new neighborhood to access a more major road without as much congestion as you might see at one intersection when you disperse it over a larger number of intersections. But again, that would probably have to be looked at in more detail through modeling.
CEO Hastings?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through the chair, just to build on Spencer's response to Councillor Chapman. If you look at that quarter section, in all likelihood, the expense will be borne by the developer for the full extension to 30th Street. It would be unlikely that that would be a municipal expense, just given the timeline and the plans for growth in that area. The way we have it situated right now for the joint high school multi-use rec center is that 16th Avenue is being extended west to the midpoint of the quarter, and then there's going to be a road that will head south to intersect with 18th. What this is showing is what's beyond that in terms of the extension of the road all the way to 30th Street, which will likely be triggered by additional residential and some tertiary commercial development. And that's typically, when it's triggered by such a manner, it's usually the developer that would pay most, if not all, of that expense, and or a municipal partnership in the form of off-site levies. So I'm just providing a bit of the funding source case for how either option 1 or 2 gets handled from a expense perspective.
Councillor Simpson?
Thank you, Your Worship. I'll make a motion to approve the transportation master plan.
Okay, we have a motion by Councillor Simpson to approve the transportation master plan as presented. Any discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All in favor? That's carried unanimously. And then we're on to 4.2.
Here. With regards to item 4.2, focusing on Highway 3 and 20th Street, the functional planning study, I'm not going to say too much, as really the focus of the conversation is going to be around what the experts have to share. But I will just mention that this work is born out of one of several reasons why this particular site was purchased by the town. The others being the addition of potential signage, short-term ability to accommodate business for the Main Street revitalization project and things of that nature. So with that in mind, I'd like to turn the floor over to the consultants for a more in-depth discussion around what the functional planning study has shown and what council's options may be moving forward.
Through you, Mayor Craig, members of council. So following the initial draft submission of the network analysis report earlier in 2020, a more in-depth look at the intersection of Highway 3 and 20th Street, or Highway 845, was undertaken through the Highway 3 and Highway 845 functional planning study. The study was initiated to further explore the recommendations from the network analysis and additional options to address operational issues at the intersection, as well as challenges at the intersection of 20th Street and 20th Avenue, which relate to the northbound queue at Highway 3. So in terms of the overall operations currently, the actual level of service that we spoke about earlier is quite good at the intersection, with most movements being your level of service A or B and the occasional level of service C. But the challenge that's happening is your northbound traffic is backing up and impacting the 20th Avenue intersection, causing operational and safety issues at that location. So 2 options have been presented as in the functional planning study: the addition of a northbound right turn lane, which would be done in conjunction with a northbound left turn arrow, as well as the median And then the alternative being the potential median closure at 20th Avenue, creating 2 right-in, right-out intersections on each side of that median. As growth in the region occurs, the intersection of Highway 3 and 20th Street is going to continue to get busier, and additional improvements will be required in the future. So the operations are good now, but you do have that challenge on the south leg of the intersection. With all municipalities in our province and arguably across the country finding themselves in challenging financial times, that's where we wanted to explore what other options there might be for the town of Coaldale to consider. Because although in the long term that northbound right turn lane does help, it also may not be worth, the benefit at this time may not be worth the cost to construct it when there might be other options available to you. So with the alternative of presenting the closure of the median, it would be a less of a capital cost, but it would also require some community and stakeholder engagement because you're going to be changing traffic patterns. We were out there observing things today, and there's a lot of people that come off the highway eastbound and then turn onto 20th Avenue, right? So where are they ultimately destined for? Are they destined for a business that's right there and now they're going to either choose a different business or continue on their way? Or are they destined for further down the network and maybe continuing on the highway works, right? So you'll want to have some of those conversations with the community. So one thing that we have also been considering in recent discussions with the town is that you may want to consider phasing options at the intersection as well. So we presented 2 options, but you could also take more of a staged approach. So looking at the existing traffic signals at Highway 3, there does currently exist the signal head to facilitate that northbound left arrow. My understanding from town staff is that currently it is only in operation when the train is coming through, so it's currently linked to the train preemption. So still allowing that northbound left turn movement, but no other movement if a train is crossing. So a request could be made to Alberta Transportation to relook at the traffic signal timing plans, as they're the ones who maintain that timing plan, to incorporate the turn arrow in your peak hours. So it may not be needed off-peak, right? But during those peak hours when your traffic is backing up and impacting the intersection of 20th Avenue, could look at implementing that. With step 2 potentially being that median closure, right? If you try step 1 and it doesn't work, going to that next step, but then that allows you time to have those community conversations. And then ultimately you've positioned yourself very well by having purchased that former 7-Eleven and gas station site, in being able to be well positioned that when there's available funding or if additional intersection improvements are required, then you're already in a position and you aren't having to enter into short-term land negotiations, which can often be more costly than when you've had the forethought to purchase that property ahead of time and plan for the future improvements. The other benefit to having purchased that property already is that you've removed that access point, both access points with no traffic currently there, but especially the one that's on Highway 845 in between the highway and 20th Avenue, as whatever plans you move forward with in the future, it would be recommended to keep that access permanently closed to increase safety in the area. But one of the things, if you do proceed with the median closure, in terms of the community and stakeholder outreach, is if the median is closed off, we saw there's a large number of vehicles that come eastbound off the highway and then turn. Some of those vehicles may then be tempted to turn and go down the narrow alley on the south side of the businesses, and that's not an alley that's wide enough for 2-way traffic. That's not why, right, not the intent of an alley, first of all, but also it wasn't designed to handle the increase in traffic. So we presented a number of options that could be considered and discussed with the community as part of that larger outreach to address that. So you can always look at local traffic only signage, but signage alone doesn't often provide the results that you're looking for, as those who are determined will often continue through. The potential for speed bumps in the alley, as it is a paved alley, or potentially converting it to one way. So converting it so that you can only travel westbound on the highway. So then that traffic that's coming from the highway wouldn't be able to go in that direction. But any of those options would have to be discussed with those businesses, as they're also used for loading and unloading in the back of the properties. So, yeah.
If I may, Mr. Chair, just to follow up on Nikki's presentation, I did just want to highlight that one of the reasons for the focus on proactive discussion and engagement with the community from the just passed transportation master plan is exactly for situations such as this. So with the median option, of course, that's something that would need a substantial discussion with the community before any final decision were to be made. At least that's the suggestion or the directive that the TMP would provide. So I just wanted to highlight that that's the exact example as to why that's been a focus in the broader directive document that the TMP represents.
Thank you, Worship. So I'm just looking for clarity, because a few council meetings back, a couple months maybe, I thought we were informed that that wasn't wide enough for right-hand turn off of 20th onto Highway 3 heading east. And now in this traffic plan, it's now saying we should have a right-hand turn. So I'm really confused. Is it? Isn't it? Our initial intent of buying that property was to make a right-hand turn lane, but then we were told that there wasn't enough room, or there was something that we couldn't do a right-hand turn. So is it possible or is it not possible?
Through you, Mayor Craig. While I'm not sure of the context where those comments were made, from some observations we made today, I can maybe offer a bit of insight as well. So there is definitely room with having purchased the former 7-Eleven site to widen the roadway itself, and that would be one of the intents, is to use some of that land to widen the roadway. What I did observe while out at the intersection was a very significant portion of the truck traffic that is making that northbound right turn is making it from this center lane and turning. And so if you do move forward with designing and constructing the right turn lane, when the design is undertaken, what will need to be looked at is making sure that the appropriate design vehicles are used based on the size of those trucks that are moving, because you'll want to try to come up with a design that's going to keep them in their lane, because from what I saw today, the majority of the large trucks turned from the center lane. So now you're going to be shifting people over. But the design of your right turn lane can be altered depending on your design vehicle. So a smaller vehicle is going to have a tighter right turn, but to accommodate the large traffic, it's going to need a different radius for that truck to be able to get around it.
Councillor Holm?
Thank you, Your Worship. Just a question. When you modeled the left-hand turn lane on northbound traffic on 845, did you also model what the impact of that would be on 18th Avenue and 845 or 20th? Because just looking at our existing data, it looks like 18th and 20th, or 845, 18th Avenue and 845, is our second worst intersection for times for eastbound, westbound traffic making turns. And if we all of a sudden now put a left-hand turn lane on our northbound traffic, we're going to pile more traffic up on the north side of the tracks, interfering with 18th Avenue at that intersection again. So I'm just wondering if both of those were modeled at the same time to make sure that we didn't solve one problem and cause a bigger problem that's already shows up on your data as being an issue.
Craig? So when it was modeled, it does take into account all movements of the intersection, and there weren't concerns with queuing identified by the adjusted signal timings for that southbound leg. So the southbound leg was still found to operate well. And the one thing I just want to reiterate too from some of our earlier discussion in the transportation master plan is, from your level of service and your delay that motorists are experiencing at your intersections are operating throughout the town very well, right? There are just a few little areas with the queuing, and not a delay or an actual level of service issue, but more because of the stacking and how closely that 20th Avenue is to Highway 3. But in the modeling, the southbound movement still operated well, and there was no significant queuing created by the signal timing plan, or changes.
CEO Hastings?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just to build on the discussion, two of the other transportation elements associated with the former 7-Eleven site lands was the ability to create a pedestrian walkway that's detached from the roadway, and that is a transportation-related benefit, albeit one for pedestrians. And the other one is the control over the destiny of the site to limit the amount of turning movements that occur from that long term. In the context of the purchase, there were several different reasons given for rationale, of which one had to do with transportation planning and the ability to utilize the land there for different transportation options, but that wasn't the only consideration given to council when the opportunity for purchase came forward. There were several which, including some economic development related ones, digital signage being two such examples.
Okay, so does that cover this part of it? Any further, okay, Councillor Simpson?
Thank you, Your Worship. For the time being, when we're thinking of this, one thing I've seen in other towns, and on the 845 there, just before the 20th Avenue, what if we put a line in with a sign that wait here until area is cleared at the traffic lights, like something associated with that? Do you find that people actually follow those signs and lines on the roads? Because that's where I find sometimes people they go too far ahead and now they're blocking 20th Ave, right?
I think at times, unfortunately, traffic signage isn't always obeyed. And I did see the same thing today when we were observing things, is people almost wanted to protect their spot in line and not let anyone in, and so they'd sneak up, and now they're blocking the intersection, which then makes a more challenging situation. Even if the intersection were clear and if we're just queued to the kind of north edge of 20th Avenue, when those lanes are full, the ability for someone on 20th Avenue to be able to see is impeded by those vehicles. So while that would improve things, you'd still have a challenging situation there, because what we observed today is people would wait for a while and then want to sneak through, they aren't getting through, and so then they'd start to get riskier in their movement and sneak through, but by the time they got through, someone's turned off of the highway and now you've got a near miss happening. So it would improve things if people would not block the intersection, but I don't feel that signage alone would keep them from blocking the intersection, and you'd still have a challenging situation even if it were successful.
CEO Hastings?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have a question through to Nikki or Bruce. In the presentation, you mentioned that there's a possibility to phase in the upgrades at the intersection of 20th Avenue and 20th Street by the subject property to look at the Alberta Transportation Timing Plan for peak hours. Can you just talk us through a little bit, like what would be required process-wise? Is the study that you've done here sufficient for us to make that request? Because typically they like to see the data associated with any request. Is what we have here sufficient for their needs in order to make that determination? That's my first question. And then what would the cost, if any, be associated with such a request?
Go ahead, Bruce.
Through the mayor, so we do have enough information to be able to make that request to Alberta Transportation. Typically, they would want to see some analysis, which we have shown in the functional study that we presented to the town. In terms of cost, as Nikki mentioned during the presentation, the actual infrastructure is already there with the signal head and the left turn arrow. It's really just a matter of staff time. There might be some minor upgrades required, but I think everything is there. It'd be less than $3,000 likely to do this type of improvement. So I think we have the data, and the cost would be pretty minimal.
Thank you, Your Worship. This may be a stupid idea, but have we ever considered 20th Avenue right-hand turn only? So whether you're going east or west, you would only be able to turn right. So it would take that ability of that left-hand turn through the intersection away from them, instead of impeding 845 no left turn into the businesses, because you want to keep that, I would think, as much as you want. So if you just made 20th Avenue right turn only.
The chair, so are you talking about limiting left turns from 20th Avenue, but not from traffic traveling north and south
Yes.
on 845?
So north and south would remain the same, but 20th Avenue, so east and west, would remain right turn only, or become right turn only.
It was considered. I think the difficulty in that is that, again, it's through signage only, right? So as long as that movement is still available and physically possible, you're going to see a lot of people still making that movement, that left turn from 20th Avenue, or that through movement. I think that's probably what you'll see, is the compliance won't be very high.
What about like those little boulevards that they put in, so somebody can still turn left, but the person coming east and west can't go because they would be hitting the meridian?
Yeah, that is an option as well. We didn't look at that in detail, but that is something that we've seen other municipalities use to some success. So that could be looked at. Because I think, just to add on to that, I think, as mentioned earlier, there was a lot of traffic coming off of Highway 3 turning left down 20th Avenue, so that would be something that we want to look at and work with the community on. So if there was some way that we could keep that movement and make sure it's still safe for that intersection, then we'd definitely explore that, because we realize that's important to the town of Coaldale.
Councillor Chapman?
Thank you so much, Your Worship, and I think you've answered a couple of my questions, and particularly since I asked them in the first presentation. I like the idea of a right in, right out concept off of 20th Avenue, and I would certainly like to have you consider a mirror image of that median concept on 18th Avenue North. And those are very doable, very affordable, I think, almost immediate type of actions. With Councillor Simpson's question about left turn off of 845 onto Main Street or 20th Avenue, I think a median would solve that issue, mainly because people will then continue eastbound to 17th Street and come by the town office and come into town that way, which will really serve it'll alleviate some of the congestion and pressure off of 20th Avenue and 20th Street, which is considerable, has been an issue for many, many years. So those are my points, and I think working with Alberta Transportation to advance the left-hand turn would be very doable, and as well as an immediate action plan that you wouldn't have to wait till you got further numbers to do that.
Councillor Simpson?
Thank you, Your Worship. Just to Councillor Chapman, I still would like a left-hand turn off of 845 onto 20th, yeah. So you would put the meridian that they can only turn left, so that you have that 20th Avenue. They would actually be going over that meridian, but it would be a curved meridian for the roadway to go, so that they could still make a left-hand turn.
Well, any other questions on this section? So we have two options here. We can just receive the report for information, or we could receive it for information and be brought back. Councillor Ohm?
For information?
We have a motion, Councillor Ohm, receive for information. Any discussion? Councillor Simpson?
Thank you, Your Worship. I would like, I don't know what the other councillors feel, but I would like the suggestion that I brought up, just to see how that would work from you guys. I would like to see something like that, because that's an option that we're still not stopping that flow of traffic into our main street for our businesses off of the highway.
Okay. Any other discussion? Call the question, all in favor? And opposed? Counselor Pauls? All right, and do you want to make another motion then?
Motion that if we can look into that idea, if right away you guys see it's not a doable, I don't expect you to go all the way, but at least find out if that is an option that we could work with.
Okay, we have a motion by Councillor Simpson. And you understand the configuration that she's recommending? Okay.
Can I just ask a question of clarification? So you talked about the importance of those southbound left turns coming in off the highway. What about the northbound left turns to go west on 20th? Is that important to council? Okay.
Continue no matter what. So I would, on the 845, I want to remain both left turns for sure.
Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Chapman?
Thank your worship, maybe through to Councillor Simpson. So you'd like to take the position that what we have now is fine in terms of the ability for traffic to turn off of Highway 3 and then turn left right away onto Main Street.
So what we see in that intersection, at least what I see in that intersection, is a backup when the lights are red at the highway, so turning left, right. So what happens is the 20th Avenue people are trying to turn left on either
Right. Yeah.
south or north. So if you impede that so that they can no longer turn left, they can only turn right, you still allow the flow off the highway onto 845 and then still onto Main Street, onto our local businesses. So they would still be able to continue left into those businesses. So it would not impede any left-hand turn, but it would impede a left-hand turn off of 20th Avenue.
I see your point there. It makes sense. And the only other addition I would ask, maybe in the meantime, is next spring that they consider painting one of those X's right at there at 20th Avenue when you make your left-hand turn onto 20th Street. Has to do with a number of municipalities where left-hand turns become more impeded because the traffic is projected too far out into the intersection. So if you do one of those X's, what are they called?
Not sure they have a name, but the signage is "Do not block intersection," and then it's painted within the intersection with an X. Yeah.
So that would be very doable as well.
Councillor Avery?
Thank you, Worship. So I'm just trying to get clarity what Councillor Simpson is asking for. If we put a median on that road for only a left-hand turn, isn't that going to impede the left-hand turn heading east on 20th, going down towards Tim's and that way, down towards Land Lake Drive?
My understanding from what Councillor Simpson has recommended is that the traffic flow on 845 will remain as is. It's the through and left turns, eastbound and westbound on 20th Avenue that she had asked us to look at in terms of restricting those turns and forcing those people traveling on 20th to turn right at 20th Street.
Okay. Councillor Holm?
Although I think it might be a really good idea, I think it's going to impact our businesses considerably, and so I will be voting against this one.
The intent on your motion isn't necessarily to implement the change, it's just to have a look at it, is that right?
Look on it, because I'm scared if we actually do something where we block that left-hand turn going on to 20th Avenue, we will impede some businesses there. So I'm just trying to think of a way that we can do it, because they can easily just go up one street and down, come back onto the 845 to be able to get that right-hand turn onto 20th Avenue. So I just, and it does clear up a lot of the left-hand turn, which is the issue on the 20th Avenue.
CEO Hastings?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just following the discussion here, council may want to add to the resolution that this is simply to explore, to see the viability, and that no final decision with respect to the upgrades at that intersection will be made until after public consultation sessions, just so it's clear in the actual resolution, all the different important pieces to the puzzle. Because if that's not added, if that resolution's looked at in isolation, the context of the discussion around that resolution may not necessarily be realized.
And I'm good with adding that into there, and just so, you know, if you get a little bit into and you realize this is just not doable, don't continue it just because of the motions, so.
So you accept that suggestion as friendly then? So we have Councillor Simpson's motion. Any further discussion? Yeah, I'll call the question. All in favor? Okay, we have, okay, 1, 2, 3, and 4. Councillor Pauls, okay, and opposed? Councillor Chapman and Councillor Holm. That carries. Thank you. And then we have item 4.3.
I believe that's the roundabout at 21st and Land O'Lakes. And if that's the case, then I might just ask for a few moments for Watt Consulting Group to be able to make their exit, and then we'll bring in the consultants from ISL.
Okay, good. Well, thank you for joining us tonight, Bruce and Nikki. And
Thank you.
okay, Spencer, are you going to introduce this topic and our guest tonight?
Yes, Mayor, thank you. I might actually have the two gentlemen from ISL introduce themselves, if that's all right. You just press on the mic here to turn it on.
Thank you guys and ladies for allowing us to present tonight. So I'm Evan Abermenko with ISL, the project manager and the main point of contact. So I've been doing consulting and municipal engineering and transportation engineering for about 13 years now. So we'll be looking at the intersection options that we reviewed with the town. So
my name is Arnie Gerlach. I'm the office manager for ISL Engineering. I've been with ISL for 12 years, and I've been in the industry for 28 years. And I'll let Evan take it from here.
sure. So the intersection we're going to be discussing tonight is the intersection of 21st Avenue and Land O'Lakes Drive. We prepared a short presentation just with an overall summary of the improvement options that we've reviewed and considered to date. So the three options we've considered are the single lane roundabout, which is shown up in the corner there, the dual lane roundabout, which is dual lane north and south, and the third option is a traffic signal. So some considerations for the single lane roundabout that we reviewed. It will require geometric improvements, so we have to modify the islands and some of the curbs have to be modified. The right-of-way, the single will fit within existing property lines, so we don't have to do any land acquisition and buy any property. The traffic volumes, a single lane roundabout can accommodate current traffic volumes. However, by 2036, the volumes exceed the capacity. So it does require upgrades, but we're about 15 years out before it would need upgrades. And the single lane has been designed so that it can be phased to a dual lane roundabout. And we've sized the middle island and the mountable island so that there's minimal throwaway once you go to a dual lane roundabout. This single lane roundabout also has the advantage of not having traffic weaving. So when you get to a dual lane roundabout, there is potential that you'd have conflicting traffic trying to make the different movements here. So a dual lane roundabout also requires geometric improvements. We'd be modifying this island, and a lot of these islands here we have to modify to accommodate the roundabout. This option does require land acquisition. You can see it in red here. We have to buy small parts of the corner here to accommodate the increased size of having a dual lane. And again, the islands all have to be mountable. So the intent is if a 53-foot truck or a large delivery vehicle comes through here, they actually drive over top of these medians. So these are all mountable. You drive over them if you're in a large vehicle. And then the final option we reviewed was the traffic signal. So this also requires some geometric improvements to the islands to increase some of the queue spacing for vehicle storage. A traffic signal can accommodate current volumes as well as 2036 volumes. However, we do have to modify the Highway 3 and Land O'Lakes Boulevard intersection signal timing. So AT might have an issue with we still haven't completed that full coordination there, but there is coordination with AT to adjust that signal timing if we want to go with the signal here. So one of the primary things that we review when we look at an intersection is a level of service. So level of service A in a signalized intersection is 10 seconds or less that you're waiting with a signal or a roundabout. Level of service B is 10 to 20 seconds, and C is 20 to 35 is on the table there. So that's just how long you're waiting idle at an intersection for. This is the current level of service, which I believe you just probably reviewed at the intersection based on 2020. So right now, it's between A's and B's. The 2024 unimproved conditions, there is some C's in there, so A, B's, and C's. But when you get to 2029, the intersection starts to fail. So we do have some F's. There's C's in here. So the intersection really drops down level of service, and that's based on 2029 traffic volumes. We forecasted 15 years out, which with each of the options, so we ran a traffic signal with the 2036 volumes. And we've got level of service, C's, B's, and A's. It's a mix of all three with the 2036 volumes of the traffic signal. We forecasted the single lane roundabout, and we're between A's and B's for the single lane roundabout. If we go to a dual lane roundabout, it's all level of service A, which means that dual lane roundabout, 2036 volumes, you're only waiting between the 5 and 10 seconds, so at most. Some other considerations and just something to think about when making the decision is the design speed. So roundabouts have a 30 km/h design speed as compared to a 50 km/h design speed. The severity of injury increases as the speed increases. So there's more severe injuries with an increased design speed. The roundabout allows for free flow traffic at off-peak times as compared to a signal, which has potential to be a stop condition at off-peak times. So when we're doing our evaluation, we're evaluating peak times, and you could potentially be stopped at an off-peak time as opposed to the roundabout. The roundabout would have a greater impact to surrounding businesses during construction. However, we would work with a contractor to come up with a staging plan to allow for at least one lane to remain open at all times. We're currently thinking that shutting down the whole thing is just not an option. And either option would require coordination with Alberta Transportation. So either it's the signal timing, or we're modifying islands or curbs within AT's right-of-way. Construction cost estimates, we're estimating the single lane roundabout to be between $650,000 and $850,000. The dual lane roundabout between $700,000 and $900,000. The traffic signal to be between $450,000 and $600,000. And just note that the traffic signal does require an annual operation and maintenance costs, and we're estimating that cost to be between $5,000 and $10,000 per year. And that's the end, so, of what we reviewed. Any questions?
The floor for questions of our Mayor, Councilor Simpson.
Thank you, Your Worship. So where would on the roundabouts, let me start first. So first for the signal lights, I thought Alberta Transportation did not want us to have signal lights there. Was that something that was discussed previously? No? No? Okay. Thank you.
Well, CLA Hastings might add to that.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just in response to Councillor Simpson, even prior to the undertaking of this project and the engagement of ISL, we did have discussions with the then technical staff at Alberta Transportation in and around 2014 as part of the McDonald's home hardware projects. And the technical engineer that was at Alberta Transportation at the time gave the strong, emphatic response that signal lights was not their preference. So that was coming from a transportation engineer staffer at Alberta Transportation 6 years ago. So just to really wind that back. My understanding is that the personnel, the technical personnel at Alberta Transportation that are there today aren't as emphatic about whether it's signal or traffic circle. So I just wanted to kind of rewind the tape 6 years.
Yeah, thank you for clearing that up. So with the signal lights are pretty much a given, but with the roundabouts, where are the pedestrians crosswalk? Because that is a heavy pedestrian area.
Yeah. We're accommodating pedestrians up here on this. So it's not, it's a shorter crossing distance, it's a shorter span back here, and we did that on purpose to limit the amount of exposure pedestrians have to vehicles.
Any other? Go ahead.
I might have a few questions on this one. I drive it several times a day. So, the safety rating from today, if you just took it from a safety rating from what it is today, from the single lane, the double lane, and the signal lane, which would be the safest in the end for pedestrian and vehicle traffic? Because there's a lot of near misses on that intersection.
You want to handle that question?
Yeah, I guess they're all good options because with respect to the signals, signal timing would be the consideration. With respect to the roundabouts, there is refuge for the pedestrians. So you'll see the lines, the white lines through the medians. Those are considered refuge for the pedestrians. So the pedestrians can travel just across the single lane. Then they would be in where the median is, and then they would be going across another single lane. So there is a fair bit of refuge for the pedestrians. And with the roundabout, it actually pulls them away from the intersection itself more than what a typical signalized intersection would.
Okay.
Your Worship, so also with that, for the north north side of it, that pedestrian crosswalk, can that be taken out? I just find that might be a little bit too close to the highway. I've seen some people jaywalk across that road, and I've literally almost seen one hit by, like, they just got missed by near misses because somebody just turned quickly off the right side, turning right off the highway, right? So.
Sure.
Yeah, I think it can be taken out. One thing to consider, though, is pedestrians often use the path of least resistance. So if they see a straight line to somewhere, they will often use it, right? So then they might start utilizing a location that isn't a crosswalk. So by having the crosswalk there, it gives them and the drivers, everybody knows where the crosswalk is. So there is some safety features that way. By taking it away, yeah, there's a little bit of risk that people won't use it, but you can definitely do that.
Okay, Councillor Chapman?
Yeah, thank you so much, Your Worship. Thank you so much for your presentation and the proposal here. I like the fact of, in theory, where your pedestrian crossings are. I'm sure that'll help with when you yield to a pedestrian, that it will help clear the intersection to some degree. I suppose if you're making a right-hand turn and there's a pedestrian there that you have to yield to them, so that it does kind of remove you from being in the traffic. The left-hand turns might be a little more difficult, but I like in theory, where the location of the crosswalks are. That being said, currently the traffic coming off of Highway 3 onto Land O'Lakes Drive, it's still 70 kilometers an hour in there, and so I'm assuming that this would be more ideal with traffic flow that would be reduced on Highway 3, say down to 50 kilometers an hour. Would that be a better assessment?
Well, I think the traffic would need to slow themselves down in order to make that turn, and then the roundabout itself would be posted at 30.
Councillor Holm, and then Councillor Simpson.
Thank you, Your Worship. Looking at your numbers there, so existing numbers were within the limits of a safely operating intersection as it is right now. And then you say that by 2036, the numbers absolutely explode. Can you give me some idea, like what kind of traffic count are we talking? Because I keep looking at our town plan and the rest of our transportation master plan, and I'm having a real trouble trying to figure out where any additional traffic is going to come from, or why. Because there's no additional residential south of there that can connect to that road, except, I guess, over off of 17th and 30th Avenue, which I doubt that many will go through there unless they all have to go to Tim Hortons. There's going to be no residential development to the west. There might be some commercial. So I'm just wondering, where did we get these massive increases in traffic by 2036 that would really drive us this direction? So I'm just having trouble with it.
So the only thing, the Watt plan identified an issue by 2029, and then they provided their forecasted traffic information to us, and then we calculated our traffic forecasting information as well and tried to match closely to what they estimated. And we're both estimating, yeah, that because they had an issue by 2029 that they had the intersection, and then we were out by 2036. But we did provide the town with a detailed breakdown of where the additional traffic and the percentage of how it would increase, and so that is available. Sure.
Okay, Councillor Simpson.
Thank you, Your Worship. When discussing with all this, what's the average lifespan of pavement for a roundabout?
The average life of asphalt itself it's designed for 20 years. So a lot of communities will let it go longer than that. So on an average, you'll see a lot of communities that have asphalt that's between 25 and 30 years. But the design life of a standard asphalt design is 20 years.
Any further questions? Well, Councillor Simpson, this
Yes, I
is
got
her
quite a few.
pet project.
So, so for semis to drive through, if they need extra room, they can use the Meridians. Will most of them have to?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. And then, what about snow clearing through roundabouts? Do they seem to get icier than a normal road? Like, does it need more sanding? Does it need more, like, the winter maintenance, I guess?
I think in the city, we see drifting just because of the shape of the roundabout. I think the city does quite a bit more snow clearing and maintaining the drifting that would happen from a roundabout.
I suspect that this roundabout, being more of a mini roundabout, will have less of that problem because it's not as pronounced.
Right, it's, yeah.
So a lot of the roundabouts that you'll see in like in a large urban center, there's something in the middle of it that is creating a bit of a wind block, whereas this one, really all you're doing is raising it enough so that you have positive drainage on the surface.
Okay. Any further questions? So we go ahead, Councillor Holm.
Receive this report for information?
So it's just basically option one there? Okay. So Councillor Holm moves that council will receive the report for information and defer a decision with respect to the desired intersectional enhancement to the 2022 budget. Okay. Any discussion? Seeing none, Councillor Simpson?
So I'm not in objection to Councillor Holmes' motion, but for safety improvements on that intersection, for the meantime, is there anything we can do, especially for pedestrian safety? Because a lot of people come out of that right-hand turn fast and have to slow down quickly for that intersection, and like just even like those flashing beacons, and then even if we had a flashing one or like halfway up so that they hit the button and it goes on that crosswalk that we have, but it actually goes up further up the street to give them a little bit more of a heads up. Is that something that's doable?
Go ahead, Spencer.
Thank you, Mayor. Through to Councillor Simpson. That is actually something that was suggested when Watt did a bit of a tour of the community. They had done one prior to today and one today as well, and that was actually something they looked at. We hadn't had time to share that with ISL, but Watt had suggested rectangular rapid flashing beacons at that location, in addition to changing the parallel line crosswalks to zebra crossings for all three legs of the intersection that have formalized crossings right now.
All right, good. So, Councillor Chapman.
I'll, just in favor of the motion, but in the meantime, if Spencer and Kalen could possibly find out more of I guess more of a realignment of the lines at that particular intersection, that's where so much difficulty of crossing in and out, that sort of a thing really becomes an issue. And again, the other issue would be the speed coming off of Highway 3. That's already being a primary issue for many people.
Okay, so we have Councillor Holmes' motion. Any more discussion on that one? Call the question, all in favor? Okay, and then Councillor Simpson.
I'd like to make a motion to do zebra, to look into doing the zebra crosswalks and flashing beacon, and having one pedestrian flashing beacon earlier in the street too. for the southbound traffic.
That's kind of, I would say that that's kind of restrictive. Maybe we'd be willing to maybe direct the administration to look at safety improvements along those lines, and because without necessarily being so prescriptive about.
Yes.
CEO Hastings?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just for greater clarity, I'm assuming the intent for this exploration would be for 2021, in which case we should bring some budgetary details of these types of solutions to the December 14th council meeting so that council can look at this expense and discuss it as part of the budget approval process.
Yes, yeah, that's something I would like in coming up as soon as possible, to be honest.
So we have that motion by Councillor Simpson. Any discussion? Okay, I'll call the question. All in favor? Yeah, that's carried unanimously. Thank you. Okay, great. Anything else then, Spencer?
No, Mayor. It's actually not my item next, which is a change, I know, but if we could give a few moments just for the consultants to make their way out, that would be appreciated.
Okay, thank you very much, Evan and Adrian, for coming out.
Thank you.
Arnie, I mean, sorry.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. So at the November 5th, 2020 special council meeting, we brought preliminary operating and capital budget discussions to council. Following that, we've come back with further breakdowns of the 2021 draft operational budget. So what we've done is we've taken essentially the line by line items for the town of Coaldale budget, broken that out to council with further detail for specific items over $20,000 for greater clarity for council for these discussions. So the current draft operating budget for 2021 has a funding shortfall of just over $75,000. It should be noted that council must pass a balanced budget under the MGA. The balanced budget can be achieved by either increasing revenues or reducing expenses, or a combination of the two. Just a little breakdown of the town of Coaldale departments. So right now lists specifically 33 departments within the town of Coaldale that require annual operating funding, which is shown here in the report. So just again, previous kind of information on how the budget process works. So when administration does prepare the budget, we regularly review operational spending and projected spending trends into the future, along with contractual agreements. Those figures are taken and adjusted into the draft budget. While the projected line items for 2020 aren't included in here, Council should take comfort in knowing that corporate services has developed a draft operating budget that is fairly close to current spending trends and needs. Historical spending is reviewed and presented to council throughout the year on a quarterly basis through variance reports. Typically, we don't follow the kind of the general term of adding 2 or 3% each year to the budget for inflation. Rather, we look at kind of need and actual spending. This way, it doesn't create a essentially inflated budget over time, but consistently adding 2 or 3% to the budget. Administration has followed the strategic mandate by council for the desire of excellent value for money. It's one of the key principles in the 2021 draft budget. As it stands now, there's essentially very little fat in the draft operating budget to cut, unless council would discuss possibly addressing service levels in various issues. By maintaining the current service levels, we feel that administration, especially in this economic times, that we've brought the best budget forward to council right out the gates. Previous years, it hasn't been uncommon to bring forward large operating budgets with with operating deficits that total hundreds of thousands of dollars for council to sit through and decide upon. This process sometimes took 4 budget meetings. In contrast to that, administration is what we've done over the past 3 years is we've looked at the current proactive and analyzed spending trends to essentially cut out unnecessary expenses before bringing those budgets to council for their first review. We've looked at increasing the additional funds to reserves every year. In 2019 and 2020, council had mandated 0% municipal tax increase for the residential. We've been able to do this considering other compounding expenses that have increases such as wages with grid and COLA increments every year. So in light of this, it would not be reasonable to assume that if we went through the operating budget line by line, that we would be able to reduce expenses by $75,000 to bridge the current shortfall, again, unless we were looking at reducing possible service levels. A more realistic approach is that one, council either decline potential new operating items, 2, look at reducing service levels, or 3, raising revenues through a combination of methods available to council, such things as franchise fees, tax rates, and utility rates. So we do have essentially 4 options here available to council. Just of note, it is staff recommendation to proceed with option 4 here. In considering which options to proceed, a few items of note that council has requested additional information from administration in regards to options available for recycling compost drop-off station. Given there's a number of variables, the results of this probably won't be expected by the December 14th council meeting. When considering this budget, council may also want to consider funding measures for that potential expense in the future, possibly creating a contingency for such a site in the future. It should be also noted that current community engagement is planned in regards to the town CPO program. Ultimately, depending on the direction council sets for the program, potential funding adjustments could be necessary. Finally, with respect to the Gem of the West Museum, administration has retained a consultant to evaluate the facility for mold. The results of this assessment will be presented to council at the next meeting of December 14th, along with any other improvements for the facility that may be required. So with that, it's recommended to council that administration bring back a budget at the December 14th council meeting with this direction from council from this meeting that will allow us to, 1, fund the current operating budget and the deficit currently of $75,000, create additional operational contingency for a recycling compost drop-off station, and consider increasing the amount of funding redirected for municipal capital reserves or other contingencies that come up throughout the year. As you've kind of scrolled through the staff report there, there are just some comparative informations for council to consider in regards to franchise fees, followed by the draft operational budget on a line-by-line basis, along with some notes from the previous budget meeting highlighting comparative revenue streams for the town of Coaldale, and municipal taxes, utility rates, and franchise fees in comparison to other municipalities. So with that said, I will turn it back over to council now for any questions or discussions they may have.
I'll turn the floor over to council. Councilor Avery.
Your worship. So I'm not in favor really of any of the options because I see this as operational. I don't want to see our taxes going up in light of everything that's going on, not only in Coaldale but in the world. So I'm not in favor of any type of increase in taxes, whether it's through franchise fees or mill rate. I don't see an option where it says council rejects a budget and gives administration the authority to cut $74,000 out of the budget because, again, we're governance, we're not operational. We don't know what can be cut without affecting. I look at contracted services and maybe we could cut a good percentage right out of one line item in operations, but that's not my job as an elected official. It's to depend on you guys as the experts to bring that back to us at a zero increase in the budget.
In regards to that, the funding we have is also set based on service levels. So if council would like to reduce some of these expenses, administration would need direction from council if they would like to reduce potential service areas to cut some of that funding. Looking at contracted services here, even though that is a large item of total, 1.7 million, part of that is there's over $700,000 for waste recycling and compost and garbage. So you can't just cut money from that because that's essentially a set figure. We can cut $75,000 from this budget, but would council like to see less funding for parks or roads? That would be some direction that we would need to do that.
Councilor Avery.
Thank you, Worship. So a follow-up to that is we don't see that in our line items. We don't see a breakdown of what contracted services is. We see contract services as $1.7 million or $1.5 million. So it's hard, again, for us to cut something that we don't see. If it's grouped in there, I appreciate that. But how do we say cut $75,000 out of that line if I don't know every service that's in there? Is it snow removal? Is it garbage? Is it recycling? Everything that goes into that. Unless we have that broken down line for line, again, it's operational, we're governance, and if it's not going to be broken down to where we say we want to take 2% from this and 1% from that, I really think it should be up to administration to come back and say this is where we can pull back on some of our services.
So I'm just going to refer you to page 13 of the staff report. For example, there's contracted services, and you will see that's broken down kind of line by line item. So just kind of an example of how those funds are split there. So you can see, for example, $200,000 for the sewer relining program, $100,000 for snow removal, $95,000 for road patching, and so on and so forth. So there are some indications there about the amount of service level. If you're looking for more specific detail, there's going to be, we could have more budget meetings for specific service levels, but without providing exactly each line by line. We've provided essentially everything over $20,000 here for further breakdown. So if you are looking for more specific breakdown, we can provide that. It just will take multiple meetings to provide that to council.
Okay, we have a suggestion by Councilor Avery. Does anybody else have anything in that? Councilor Avery's looking at cutting operational budget, or does anybody else want to speak to whether other options are available? Councilor Holm?
Just wondering, when we look at some of our revenue streams that we have here, one of the big ones is highway and traffic fines. And if we looked at 2020 2021, this existing budget year, I believe that traffic fine number is going to be much, much lower than what it is now. So I'm just worried that we're going to be going into next year in a deficit position already. And I'm not sure whether we've finally decided how we're going to set up our CPOs and our photo radar, et cetera, which an awful lot of that $460,000 comes from. So I just wondered how confident you are in that big a line item, given that I'm guessing that 2021 might be less than half of that.
Yeah, that's to your question, Councillor Holm. Like, that definitely is an area that can fluctuate. We don't anticipate it, being anywhere close to a 50% decrease. We have reduced that line item from last year. So what are we at now? We're 450,000. Was that the amount? That is, we forecasted, I believe, roughly a 15% decrease from last year. So again, if council decides to change the CPO program and the photo radar, there could be some operational impacts from that we again have to further consider if that revenue does decrease. But we have decreased it somewhat for essentially the COVID effect that we do predicting seeing.
Through the chair, just building on Kyle's comments and Councillor Holmes' question, excellent question. Part of the reasoning behind the drop in revenues this year was equipment software related. So there were a number of tickets that were actually received that we had to discard because of a formatting glitch on the printouts. And anytime that you issue a ticket, there can't be any types of errors. So a lot of the tickets that we were incurring the expense of the operator and the operation, but several of those tickets had to be taken out and discarded because of the software glitch. So part of the revenue, it was perhaps COVID related, less driving, less volume, less speeding. The other part of it is we had some operational issues that we've since corrected. So I don't anticipate that that'll be a factor for 2021 like it was in 2020. The bigger unknown is how many people will be driving, and that's something that's out of our control. But the issues that were in our control, we've since rectified.
Second question that I have then is when we look at our salaries and wages, both the permanent and part-time and seasonal, it works out just under $5 million. Is that based on 100% employment? Or is that based on knowing that there's going to be continual turnover, et cetera, et cetera? Is that based on 85%? Is it based on 90%? What is that number based on? Because I just don't want to have it come back next year at this time and go, wow, we saved $400,000 because we didn't fill this position, we didn't fill that position, and so we're going to take that money and put it someplace else. So I want to know, what is our long-term wages been? Are we normally running at 90% or 95% filled positions, and is this based on 100% or not?
So the current wages in here are based on the staff operating plan for next year as fully funded. So right now, all the positions that the town of Coaldale has within their org charts are essentially all funded through this. So right now, the only thing that could be anticipated is if you had, say, one staff member leave the organization, and if that position is rehired, if there is like some downtime between filling a vacant position, that could be the only area in here that you may see a surplus. But other than that, it's essentially based on the funding model, or the organizational model for next year and going forward. So it's essentially fully funded.
Go ahead, Councillor Holm.
Just to follow up on that then, if this is based on fully funded, historically, what have we been at? Have we been at 90%, 95%, 97%? Because if we're historically at 95%, because we continually normally have long-term disabilities, we have maternity leaves, we have people leaving for other organizations, and it takes 2 or 3 months to fill that position. So if we've normally run at 95%, well, 5% of $5 million makes up that $75,000 very quickly. So that's a number that I'd like to hear.
I don't have a specific stat for you as to the number of days or variances we have throughout the year. Part of what we do when we do our staff wages, you know, we do take things such as benefits, whatnot, that differ between, you know, the different coverage that may be required for an employee, and we may average that out to a level of 85%. So they're, like, the benefits are one part of it. If you look at the staff wages, if you only say cover 90% of your staff wages for next year, and you just assume that we have some turnover, again, we only have about 50 to 60 full-time employees throughout the year. So if you don't have that turnover in a year, then we're coming back to council at the end of the year saying, you know, we may need more funds. But if you budget based on the assumption that we're going to have people, you know, somebody on short-term disability or somebody away for a specific period of time or a vacancy throughout the year, that does become a little dangerous, because you're budgeting hoping for a deficit in your staffing levels, which may not happen. So the alternative to that is, if it doesn't happen, we have to come back to council at the end of the year saying we were over budget because we had anticipated our staffing levels not being as high. So it's not kind of a recommended approach, because it's something that's tough to predict and tough to see if it's going to happen. Essentially, like, there's not, if the town of Coaldale and all the employees for the next year worked the entire year and there's no turnover, that budget number there should be 0% over or under.
And Councillor Chapman?
Thank you, Your Worship. So the 1% increase for utility rates and franchise fees that you gave, the average household was $25.91 in total. Now, what's the most expensive household and what's the cheapest household? Like, what's the range?
So franchise fees and utility rates, like for the utility rates, this is just based on average. So it's, with these being user pay systems, if you use a lot more water, you're going to pay a lot more. I don't have a high-low scale. I just have an average for you.
Okay.
Councillor Chapman?
Thank you, Your Worship. These are small questions. They won't change the picture any, but just some clarity on farmland taxes. Since annexation took place, we do not have any control over those taxes, in the sense that we have a 25-year moratorium or sunset figure on those farmland taxes.
As part of the annexation, there's also annexed residential and commercial properties too. So that farmland, some of that is within the town of Coaldale and some of that's within Lethbridge County. Anything referring to the annexation, you're correct. There's essentially two orders of annexation, one from 20 to 25 years ago, in that those rates will never change unless the property is subdivided. The one recently that was done a couple years ago is the 25-year rule, in that those will only change if Lethbridge County changes their rates. So you're correct in that we don't have any control over a portion of those taxes there.
My other question is regarding business licenses, and I don't remember having a conversation or a review of business licenses, and maybe that might be something administration may want to review and bring forward, and maybe have a conversation with Chamber of Commerce and other stakeholders with regards to business licenses.
Yeah, so essentially since I've been here in 2 years, the business license have just been status quo, and I think they've probably been like that for a few years before. So again, it could be always something to consider in the future, but I don't think they've been changed or adjusted in multiple years for rates.
Councillor Avery?
So our last meeting, you stated it's not good practice to take your capital grant money if you get it and apply it towards operational, because you're taking from one to get to the other. And so then you're getting yourself into more trouble if you take capital money into the operational. So what are we doing with the surplus of operational this year if we're not going to apply it towards next year's budget? Because if it's operational and it's a surplus, whether it's wages or equipment not bought or what have you, operational is operational. And if there's a surplus and we're not applying it towards this, what are we doing with it?
Yeah, so historically, as we've kind of communicated before, any surplus that we have at the end of the year, we've taken the approach of letting departments know that if they do have a surplus, those funds are allocated towards their capital reserves for the future, so they can use that fund for future capital projects. So right now, with the projected surplus that we have for next year, those funds are specifically allocated in part for capital projects for next year, one of that being the Lagoon lift station. Sorry, the Lagoon, not the lift station, just the Lagoon upgrade. So this year's surplus is projected to next year's capital. If you took, for example, this year's surplus and you applied it to the 2021 budget, you would cover your deficit for this year, but you're not going to have those funds for the budget every year going forward. So it'll just fix the problem for this year, but then if you don't have that surplus again, the next year you're going to be missing that revenue stream going forward every year. So it's just essentially a one-year fix, not a long-term fix.
And, you know, I want to commend you for your budgeting, and that, you know, I think all council can see that the sophistication in how it's going has improved year over year, and largely because of the expertise that brought it to bear on the topic. And, you know, some of the things that we are dealing with, I mean, I don't want it lost tonight that, you know, we're in a great position that here we are, we're kind of talking about a $75,000 shortfall, whereas other communities are talking, you know, several hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars of shortfalls and that. So, you know, I think that is a huge testament to our corporate services people led by yourself and that. And, you know, council has been, you know, working on the plan of, you know, the last 3 years, you know, trying to go toward zero on the mill rate and whatnot. And, you know, that's a awesome thing to plan for in that, because it is very palatable. And but then it does cause issues, because, you know, like if we would have approved 1 or 2% in 2018, that 1 or 2% would be in today's budget right now, and, you know, having anything else unchanged, we'd be looking at maybe $100,000 or whatever surplus, just because we adopted a more laissez-faire thing of just going ahead and say, oh, we're anticipating inflation is going to be 1 or 2%, so let's keep ramping our mill rates up and going that way, which was a lazy way of doing it and whatnot. So, you know, I think council has really made a big challenge for administration by striving for zero, because we all know that nothing in our life stays at zero. You know, the inflation goes up and everything goes up in that. So, you know, it's sort of a very big challenge for our administration and to keep striving for that. And you know, with your, you know, you in your report, you strongly say, and I believe that you haven't adopted any lazy habits of just saying, oh, well, we'll just, you know, we'll go and drive up each department by a couple of % each year and, you know, not have any science behind it because we know inflation's there and whatnot. You know, I think it is a very arduous job that has been done by you and your staff to keep, you know, a very fine point on what we're doing in that. So, you know, I want to make sure that that's not lost tonight because, you know, I think we're the benefactors of some very good talent and that, and staring at this kind of a, you know, a small number is quite refreshing. I mean, any, you know, deficit is, you know, something to consider, but, you know, this, you know, I think we're blessed in Coaldale to have this kind of a problem to stare at compared to some of our colleagues that are looking at a much bigger exercise. And we, you know, in council, I mean, you know, we can fix this easy. I mean, you look at the public works staffing request, the labor, that one FTE, I mean, that's probably how big of a, how many dollars is a position like that, you know, we can just, we
That was
can look at
approximately 55,000.
55,000 and that, so, you know, there's the different operating requests that we got are there as well type thing, so it's, and we don't have to necessarily pass the budget today, but we do, I think we need to give direction on the mindset of council going forward. And I guess for the franchise fees, Kyle, do we have to make that decision sooner rather than later because of the notifications through the ATCO and Fortis and regulatory advertising that might have to be done, or can that wait till December as well to?
So with the franchise fees, essentially, excuse me, whatever decision council would make, that probably wouldn't come into effect until March or April of 2021. So my recommendation to that would be, so if this was a $75,000 deficit, and if council, say, did increase revenue to get that or reduce expenses, if you use the franchise fees and if you increase that 75,000 to cover the deficit, that portion for the first 3 months could be covered off by a municipal stabilization reserve just for that first 3 months. The reason for that is being that this is address the problem or put the funding into place for each year going forward. So you essentially only have a shortfall for 3 months and not anything for every other year. So that would cover off that timing there. If council does not want to increase, if they don't want to look at if they want to look at a 0% for tax and franchise fees, that's understandable. But then we should look at how we want to discuss potential service levels. For example, you know, council has expressed before that road maintenance and parks are important. However, if we do look at 0%, we should be looking at which of those items or other items we want to reduce expenses or service levels to.
Councillor Simpson?
Thank you, Your Worship. From what I hear around town is that's one thing I don't think anybody would want changed is any of our operational. So I see the only way of doing it, when you look at the utilities and the franchise that you've given us, that 1% increase actually does not change our level on that grid. So I would be in favor of a 1% utility and franchise rate increase. So on average, it would just be over $25 extra per household.
If I could just comment on that. As part of this, we talked about before with the lagoon station and the debenture debt that is required for that and the funding with that, we'd look at adjustment to utility rates. So just with that coming down the pipe, wouldn't recommend maybe looking at utility rates just for this operating budget, maybe just franchise fees, just because if we're looking at utility rates in 4 months from now again, that we were just not hitting it twice.
So then, you know, like, I guess, just an observation, and I'm not making a recommendation, but if we were to entertain a 1% increase in the gas and the electrical, and then we could also not bat the request for the night and lights by, there was an increase that funding from 15 to 30, so, I mean, you could, you know, just for an example, you could kind of do 1 and 1 on the franchise fees and then cut back the night and lights by, you know, X number of dollars, whether it's be, you know, the whole, like this is, between these two of these, that's $63,250. So then you could not bat the night and lights by $12,500 or whatever dollars if you wanted to, or in that ballpark kind of a thing.
And just to put that into context, like a 1% increase in the electrical franchise fee and a 1% increase in the gas would turn out to be approximately $1 increase per month per resident.
CEO Hastings?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. When we look at our marketing information about what it costs to have business here in Coaldale or what it costs to pay taxes here if you're a new resident, a lot of people look at tax rate and tax rate only. You know, very few times have I ever heard, if any, I'm not going to move to such and such town because of the franchise fee there. And what they do is they look at the mill rate of this town and the mill rate on this town, and there's very little discussion about the franchise fee, which is a consumer-based tax. And you can have a lot of utility consumption in a small house or very few utility consumption in a large house. It's not like taxes that's based on value. It's a consumer tax, which depending on your habits, there's some optional element to it, unlike taxes. But if you look at the town of Tabor, for example, I'm just picking them because they're the closest to our size. They have the max amount for franchise fees. Yet you look at their mill rate compared to the Coaldale mill rate, and at face value, it seems like a better deal to live there if you're planning to move on the tax front. But if you actually factor in what the additional cost might be, if you factor in the franchise fees of that community, they're quite a bit higher up the franchise fee rate than Coaldale. Like I'd say 11% to 20, that's, you know, you're right around that double territory, and that's no small detail when you want to look at a cost. It's consumer-based, and if you want to look at marketing and comparative analysis, having a balanced diet from your revenue streams does help, because a lot of people do talk and they only talk about the mill rate when there's a lot of other revenue streams available to municipalities that, if you look at the table here, we're not really fully utilizing if you compare to some other examples.
I just want to clarify, like when you're talking about the franchise fees, Kyle, do they impact the industry and businesses differently than the residential? Like, would we implement this and would it cause a harder burden on the business community that I'm not aware of, or is it the same applicability?
From my understanding, it's the same. So what the electricity and the gas companies do is they take essentially your total bill, and then they times whatever rate the municipality takes onto that, and that's the franchise fee. So obviously by proportionate basis, a business would likely pay more because they use more than a residential household, but it's not like they're paying a higher rate than a resident would.
If I can remember correctly, for that recycling compost drop-off station, was that 25,000?
I believe there were two options. If you just kind of, I'll get back to you in a couple minutes. I've
Okay.
just pulled it up here.
And just to clarify, the only reason we need to do that expense is because people never followed the rules?
Part of the reason for that was before the town of Coaldale had transitioned waste collection. It was always in our contract that residents had to put their compost in their bin. However, the previous contractor was picking up waste bins that people would leave beside their bin. And that's no longer the case with the new contractor. From one, they don't want their drivers essentially leaving their vehicles from a safety perspective. And two, the trucks are just built just to pick the bins up and dump them out, right, rather than pick up bags. And so that was kind of implemented based on a desire to provide additional service levels and for the residents of Coaldale based on that.
The actual request, this is where I'm wondering, was it because people were not following the rules at the compost drop-off site, and therefore now we have to hire somebody to monitor that they are doing the proper thing? So I'm just wondering, you know, this is another user pay. Maybe instead of that, we take that $25,000, if they drop off, it's a $5 charge or something, because it's, once again, we have to hire somebody because people did not follow the rules, if I'm correct with that.
Yeah, you're correct. It was more of a compliance issue. People were dropping off stuff that wouldn't fit.
So would we be able to charge a fee for that drop-off, because now it's become a user, so the whole town has to pay for people not following the rules? I don't think that's an appropriate way sometimes to put it on the tax bill that way. So if we could take that and make it as a, turn it into a revenue, whether they gotta pay even $2 to $5 or something, and make it a user pay expense over a town pay expense, and then that would help us if we just do the franchise fees, and we would be fine then.
Yeah, that would be something to consider. There would just possibly be logistic concerns we'd have to look at, as far as if you do have the sites, how do you actually process a payment to collect a payment, right? You know, you wouldn't want something where people are just giving cash out, right? Because that is a risk. So the logistics of that would have to be considered. Just going back to your previous question on the costs, so the two costs to kind of maintain the existing site that was at the beginning of this year had an estimated cost of $50,000. Half of that was for staffing, and half of that was for tipping. Having option 2 with a bin available kind of at the lagoon site was approximately $35,000, so 25 for staff and 10 for tipping. So the two options were between $50,000 and $35,000.
So if we change that, what if it's charged on, they just need an ID, and that's charged onto their utility bill or something, and the first 2 dumps is free or something like that, so it allows users still to have it, but then after that, it's a user pay system. And that employee, then that's where that payment comes in, and, you know, for that.
Yeah, that's definitely something we can look at too and consider when we bring the options available to council for the next meeting.
Okay. And then just remember, you know, these are the two outliers, right? The solution for our waste management when you're looking at this composting thing, and then also the CPO program, the current exercise that we're underway on that. You know, I think we're funding the CPO in this budget at the former 2020 level, and so that might, you know, depending on the survey results and the discussion around the table, that could, you know, vary a little bit either way of that. So just as a kind of a footnote for history that, you know, we're not necessarily putting a tight ceiling on the budget because we still have a couple outlier questions out there, right? That's CEO Hastings?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I did speak with Clayton Rutberg, our Deputy Chief of Public Safety, who's in charge of the CPO program. The community engagement sessions that were planned have been completed, as are the results of the survey. The intent is to bring a summary of those findings to council at the December 14th council meeting, so the results of the survey along with the options and corresponding costs of those options will be at council at the same time as further consideration of the budget. So the cost of those options, of that secondary outlier, that being what type of service level model to deploy for the peace officer program, that will be at council next meeting.
So I'm not sure that we're gonna necessarily find the solution for tonight, but I'm just wondering if we can, like, I'm kind of sensing that there's a little bit of a direction to look at what it would take to maybe eradicate most of that $75,000 by maybe a utilization of the franchise fees, and maybe a second look at some of the increased operational stuff that was presented in the budget, whether, and then maybe a small portion of how we allocate the operating surplus for 2020, like if rounding it up to $5,000 or $10,000 of it, like, is that sort of the direction we want to send administration back with, or, like, I see a nod by Councillor Holm in that general philosophical bent, and Councillor Chapman, Councillor Pauls, Councillor Avery. Okay, you're mulling it for a minute, yeah, which is fine. Councillor Simpson? Okay. All right. CEO Hastings?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just not to rush council, but if there isn't approval of the budget as presented or amended with the corresponding funding streams required to balance the budget or the reduction of expenses, we will have to ask that council pass an interim budget on the 14th, and then we'll have to get the calendars out for some additional meetings in the new year. So under the Municipal Government Act, you can't go into the next year without a budget that's approved prior to the end of the year. So that's typically the fallback option if you don't have enough time to pass the budget, the actual budget. You have to pass an interim one until such time that you can pass it in the new year.
Kyle?
Just to note that council actually does pass a 3-year operating plan, so if the operating budget isn't passed before the end of the year, council would just continue the operating plan, so there wouldn't be a need to pass essentially a fake interim budget. You would just consider on the operating plan that you passed last year. Just kind of changes with the MGA and the 3-year plan.
Okay. So I think we can receive this, and then does that give you enough direction to come back with, or do you want more definitive parameters around?
So essentially, we're looking at 1% on electricity and gas, and then kind of see where we can trim the difference off. Is that correct?
In that, yeah. Generally, in Councillor Holm?
But I'd like you to look at the operating budget to try and find $75,000 without increasing the franchise fees first.
And just to that comment, that is, when we do look at the operating budget, we do make it essentially as lean as we can. So without define $75,000, I'll be frank and say we're going to have to reduce service levels. We're not at the point where we could cut a full 75, but if we were looking for, say, 15 grand or something to cover the difference, we could find that somewhere.
Well, I guess you can take it, just we understand what you're saying and that, but I guess if you, have another peekaboo at it and just see if there's any epiphany moments of things. I mean, and even, with the different wish list, the Sears isn't in business, but we had a little bit of a wish list catalog here. Last time you presented with a few increases in that, those could, be looked at, and, people could come back and say, well, we could probably do without that part, that labor for public works, or, a couple of those things a little bit too, right? So. Yeah. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just to build on the discussion, this will be the potential third year in which there's a 0% tax increase in a row. So the slicing and dicing that's been required, the efficiency analysis, the cutting out potential contingency areas that existed historically 10 years ago, those have all been proactively removed by administration. We didn't play the hedge game that's sometimes done where you have fat knowing that council is going to ask you to take it back and reduce it by a few percent, so you start with that. Like, we're not playing those games. There's some fixed expenses each year. You know, look at like the collective agreement, for instance, and the wage increase schedule that's there. You know, this is now the third year in a row where there's been increases scheduled, yet there's been a net 0% for the residential mill rate. So it's even a more difficult task to pull it off in consecutive years. You look at Municipal World magazine, which provides a really good comparative analysis of other municipalities, and they're putting out press releases praising themselves that they're contemplating a net zero for 2021. You know, this council, by contrast, did that starting 3 years ago, before it was cool. And so our job as administration is that much more difficult than any of the other administrations who are trying to attempt such a thing. For the first year, we're doing it for the third year, even though a lot of our fixed costs are going up, and that's in large part because a lot of this, the cutting has been happening proactively when we look at the budget before taking it to council. So I know there's been a lot of work done by Kyle and his finance team, and we're sincere when we say we come forward with, you know, here's the best foot forward, because you have to appreciate the compounding effect, not just for costs that are rising, but also the diminishing revenues.
Councillor Avery?
Thank you, Worship. I appreciate what you're saying, Kalen, but we also have to remember that 2 years ago we put in a levy for recreation of $120 per household. So that you know, no matter how you slice and dice it, it's a tax, but we just put the tax in as a rec levy to make it more clear of where that $120 annually was going. So we can't truly sit here and say we've gone 0, 0, and a third year at 0 for 2021. We can say last year we did 0, but the year before that we did put in the rec levy. And as I look through this budget, and I know I'm probably going to get some daggers for this one, but I'd be willing to take a cut in my wage by half. I can only speak for 10 months, but I'd be willing to do that because I represent the town, and I would be willing to take a cut in my council monthly honorarium that I get from you know, January till October when the election is.
Well, I think we have direction, generally speaking, on there's reluctance on, heavy reliance on the franchise fees, but you know, that's one of the options to look at, right? And so you can bring back, I think we're pretty close to where we need to be. So we'll receive that for information then? Anybody like to move that for information? Councillor Holm, all in favor? Okay. And then, well, Spencer, you're back in the limelight again here for a while. So 6.1 bylaw.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mayor. I'll try to be brief in the essence of time. This is a request for first reading for a rezoning application that has been brought forth on the lands legally described as lots 27 and 28, block 16, plan 6476AA, and that's more commonly known as the vacant lot that's northwest of R.A. Baker School. So again, to keep things brief, Lana, if you could bring up the site plan showing the Schedule A for the land use bylaw amendment itself, that would be appreciated. Okay, thank you so much. So when we see the area with the cross-hatching and the arrow pointing at it, that's the lot in question. And effectively what the applicant has brought forward as an idea is to ask for rezoning from R2, which it currently is now. Now that means they could have anywhere from 4 to 6 units depending on layout as a permitted use, or more units than that as a discretionary use. There used to be 11 single units in the small single-story building that was on site prior to this. However, that's problematic because of the setbacks in the zonings based on today's bylaw, because that development's been in place prior to being taken from a fire. That development was in place for years and years and years, so it met the requirements of a separate bylaw. At this time, the current property owners are asking to rezone to R1B, which is residential small lot, and the reason they're not asking to go to R1A is because the depth of the lots that they would propose run east-west after a proposed rezoning would be not quite deep enough to meet the requirements of R1A, but they would be deep enough to meet an R1B designation. And effectively what you get if the rezoning were to be successful is, if you look to the southwest, kitty corner to the lot with the arrows, lots 23, 24, and 25 were rezoned in 2006 from a larger lot that was previously used for a different use at the time. So we're getting something that already exists in the neighborhood. It already suits the context of the neighborhood in terms of the lot sizes and the orientation of the lots and what have you. So that's effectively all I have to say on this one, and the request from staff would be to move first reading of bylaw 790-P-11-20 and to set the public hearing date for December 14th with a time of 5:05 p.m. Thank you.
Questions? Councillor Chapman?
Worship, I wish we could do all 3 readings tonight and get this going. The addresses will be on 15th Street then? Is that the 3 addresses?
That's correct. That would be the assumption at this point. So at least 2 of the addresses would be 15th, and then it really depends on the orientation of the front door for the corner lot that would be created out of the subdivision. And generally when that happens, it's to the will of the property owner if they wish to have the side street or the main street be their address.
Okay. Councillor Avery?
Reading of the bylaw.
Okay, Councillor Avery moves first reading. Any discussion? All in favor? Carried. 6-2, you're back up.
Thank you, Mayor. So this particular bylaw is for a proposed road closure. It's known as bylaw 793-P-11-20. And the reason that this road closure bylaw is being brought forth, again, if we could bring the schematic up, Lana, that would be helpful. So effectively what's happened here is this was the subdivision of acreage out of the larger over 10-acre piece that represents the area shown as northwest of 12-920, and then the new subdivision that's been improved since 2018 is 1812373 on the screen. And what had happened was after that 2018 lot was created, paperwork that had been on title that was historically in place from years and years back had been reviewed by the property owner and brought forward to the town with a very specific clause in one of the easement agreements highlighted, effectively saying that one of the reasons that the roadway or the road plan, which is currently shown with the hatch marking and the arrow pointing at it, one of the reasons that was taken was to guarantee access to that larger remaining approximately 10-acre piece where the northwest of 12 text is that surrounds the smaller acreage. And what the landowner had proposed at the time of subdivision was that they build an approach over the utility easement that the town has in place for storm flows into the dog park when that's required to be used for storm flows. The easement that's on title, that's a historical document that was put in place by the town years and years ago, does indicate that an approach can be built over that utility easement that we do have, or that utility right-of-way that we do have, that would be north of this lot. So effectively what we're doing is correcting a small error that was made at the time that the acreage lot was created. And that's by virtue of the fact that it's legally allowed based on the easement agreement that was entered into between the property owner and the town. So I would like to stop there for a moment in case there are any questions before we move on, because effectively the rest of the item that I'll be presenting is focused on the process behind a road closure bylaw to get us to the point where this road, or the area that's currently road plan, can be brought back into the landowner's parcel of land that they had initially asked for at the time of subdivision.
Any questions through the Spencer? None? So this is something that we don't have to get transportation approval to close the road, or?
We do. The reason I'm smiling is because you almost took the words out of my mouth. So the next part of the presentation is that typically what would happen is the bylaw itself would be advertised in a locally circulating newspaper for at least 2 weeks. It's very similar to a rezoning in the sense that we build up to a public hearing for the road closure itself. And generally that happens before first reading of the bylaw is considered. However, that could be considered to be a little bit backwards, because then the council would be seeing it for the first time before ever providing first reading to the bylaw in front of you tonight. So I did speak with Alberta Transportation, and they were perfectly fine with providing first reading to the bylaw, and then we would go ahead and do the advertising in the same way that we would do for a rezoning. We wouldn't do any further motions on the bylaw after that public hearing. And then we would take all of the feedback we received at the public hearing and create a package for the Minister of Transportation to review, send it to them for approval or consideration of approval, and then second and third reading would be requested by council sometime in the new year once that step with the province has been completed. So really this evening what we're asking for is just first reading of the bylaw before you right now.
Okay. Councilor Avery.
The new approach will be north of that road, is that correct?
To Councillor Abe, that's one option, and that's, I believe, the option that the property owner intends to pursue. They could also propose to have an easement registered over their acreage for the sake of the larger piece for access in the short term. However, that can be problematic with the sale of the property and whether the property owner for the smaller acreage would want somebody else driving across their driveway every day. So I'm fairly confident in saying that the property owner does want to create an approach over the utility easement. But the easement agreement on title isn't as specific as to say how that happens. So the design and the way it's constructed is entirely to the town's will. And we've already made a recommendation in the staff report that that would be done in a way that has zero impact on the storm flows through that utility easement.
Councilor Holm? Okay, we have Councilor Holm moving first reading. Any discussion? Call the question, all in favor? That's carried unanimously. Thank you, Spencer. Okay, and then we get Kyle back, I guess.
Tonight, I will be presenting the borrowing bylaw 792B1120 for refinancing of existing debt. So the purpose of this bylaw is to authorize the refinancing of existing municipal debt at a lower interest rate to reduce related financing costs. The existing debt that will be refinanced relates to borrowing from bylaw number 719B0117 for facilitating economic development land, which received third and final reading on February 27th, 2017. This is the first time the refinancing matter has appeared before council. So the loan in question was initially acquired as a term loan through Alberta Treasury branches at a rate of bank prime rate less 0.25%. As of December 31st, 2019, the net interest rate paid by the town was 3.7%. Since the purpose of this proposed bylaw is to refinance unpaid principal of existing debt, and the amount and term of the proposed bylaw do not exceed those of bylaw 719B0117, this bylaw does not have to be advertised. Uh, Administration followed the procurement policy requirements and received 3 quotes to refinance this debt from 3 banks located in Coaldale, the Bank of Nova Scotia, the Bank of Montreal, and Alberta Treasury branches. All 3 banks offered a 1-year variable floating rate option, and the Bank of Nova Scotia offered the most competitive rate of prime less 0.6%. As a result of the quotes received and the low likelihood of interest rates increasing in the near future, administration plans to proceed with the Bank of Nova Scotia and its 1-year variable floating option if this proposed bylaw is approved by council. The annual payments for this loan are fixed at $104,400, and this is a combination of principal and interest, which has been historically and is continuously funded through the Northeast Industrial Reserve. The annual payments will not change as a result of the debt refinancing. The financial impact would be a larger reduction in the principal balance and lowered interest expense at the end of 2021. The expected interest savings when comparing 2020 to 2021 would be approximately $24,000. In order to move forward with refinancing this existing debt, Council must pass a new borrowing bylaw. As mentioned earlier, this proposed bylaw does not have to be advertised under Section 261 of the MGA. Administration's recommendation tonight is that Council give first and second reading for borrowing bylaw 792B1120, and that Council give unanimous consent to hold third and final reading for the borrowing bylaw 792B1120, and that Council give third reading for borrowing bylaw 792B1120.
Okay, thank you, Tim. Councillor Chapman?
Thank you, Worship, and thanks for your due diligence and bring forward this borrowing bylaw. My question to you is with regards to the variable floating prime. You're recommending not to go with a 3-year fixed. Is that sort of looking at next year and seeing, or the following year to see where it goes, or what's your thoughts there?
Historically, kind of looking at interest rates, say, over the last 5 years, it's financing debt has actually been cheaper based on variable rates there rather than fixed rates. And then with the current economic situation, and we don't anticipate interest rates increasing in the next year, possibly 2. And going off the historical benefit of using a variable rate, that's why we chose to use a variable rate rather than a fixed, because we just see it, we're predicting it being a cheaper rate going forward. That can always change, but this is kind of our best hedge on that. With the interest rate difference being so small too, we believe the added benefit from the reduced interest outweighs the potential of those rates going up in the future as well.
Is that, do you say what the principal outstanding is here?
$1,346,000, I believe. But the bylaw is saying that we will not refinance for more than $1.35 million.
Okay. If this goes through, then do we only have to find $55,000? Because you just found there's 21 here by the looks of it. Councillor Simpson?
I'll move first reading.
Okay. Any discussion? Call the question, all in favor? Councillor Chapman moves second reading. Any discussion? Call the question, all in favor? Motion for unanimous consent by Councillor Pauls. All in favor? Okay, that's passed unanimously. Who wants to sponsor third? Councillor Chapman sponsors third and final reading of the borrowing bylaw. All in favor? Yeah, that's carried. Thank you, gentlemen. All right. Well, Spencer, you're back.
Thank you, Mayor. This is my last one for tonight, so you don't have to listen to me too much longer. Lana, again, for this last item, if you could go to the schematic, the last schematic. Oh, my apologies. There's actually one more after this. I skipped ahead, so I'm wrong in two ways, so
Yeah,
I'll hold off.
I just see you there and ready to go, so I didn't want to not let Justin have it. He has our, hey, now the solid waste bylaw.
Good evening, Council. I'm here to present update to the solid waste bylaw to reflect some industry changes. So this report is, the purpose of the report is to request that Council update the solid waste bylaw to reflect recent industry changes. While this particular agenda item requests that Council amend the solid waste bylaw to reflect the changing realities of the waste handling market, administration will continue to explore ways to create a pragmatic and convenient location for a drop-off site for excess materials such as branches, organics, and recyclables. Recognizing, however, that even if a future drop-off site is made available, the same market-driven material restrictions that apply to the blue and green bins will be applied to the said drop-off site. So there's three materials that I'd like to talk about tonight within the waste handling industry that require the town of Coaldale to adapt its collection policy. The town has been provided notice by its waste handling contractor, GFL, about the changes to materials and they are able to accept. While such changes are inconvenient, they are not changes that are specific to the town of Coaldale or this particular contractor, but rather are broadly reflective of an overarching recycling and organic waste handling markets, of which the town of Coaldale represents a very small part. The city of Lethbridge, for example, does not accept glass. The municipalities of Tabor, Okotoks, Cochrane, Chestermere, Canmore, and the MD of Rocky View are in the process or already have banned the use of compostable bags. Those are just the ones we kind of had time to reach out to. Because the bags don't compost as fast as they originally hoped or thought. The material handling changes we need to respond to formally amending the current solid waste bylaw are the removal of glass. The first product that requires adaptation is the removal of glass in the blue bin recycling program. Compared to when the town commenced its curbside recycling program in 2011, glass is being phased out as a useful recycling commodity. In addition to the lack of global market for glass as a recyclable commodity, glass is primarily problematic because it breaks and contaminates all the recycled material in the blue bin. Glass was no longer allowed in the blue bins as of August 1st, 2020. Every time broken glass contaminates a load of recyclables, we are charged for the tipping fees to the landfill. So all those recyclables that would have went to recycled material went to the landfill. That's at an additional cost of $15 per ton. And with the frequency of broken glass contaminating blue bins, in the recent past, the added cost was averaging about $675 a month for the past year previously to banning glass. Given those two factors, although it's certainly more convenient for consumers to place glass in recycled bins, the environmental benefit nor the cost saving of avoiding glass adding to the tipping fees can justify the continued placement of the glass bins. Glass is therefore needed to be placed in the black or as opposed to the blue bins. Before I move on, is there any questions about glass?
Okay,
I'll move on to the removal of the plastic bags, the compostable bags. Or sorry, these are the grocery bags. Plastic bags are stretchy and the plastic films gets tangled in machinery, can damage the equipment and cause sorting facilities to shut down. They can also contaminate other types of recycling products. For the reasons they need to be collected separately from recycling. For bags and recycled at most participating retailers. And those are also no longer allowed in the blue bins as of August 1st, 2020. Now the compostable bags, these are called the BPI bags. That's the certification that's on them. So the Tabor compost site no longer allows the compostable bags as of January 1st. This change to the compostable program is a requirement from the surrounding communities that at this compost site. As of November 1st, 2020, the town of Tabor banned all these compostable bags in the communities of Okotoks, Cochrane, Chestermere, Canmore, and MDO Rocky View are also working with contractors to eliminate the bags to follow industry standard. Large communities like Calgary can still use these bags because they do break down correctly in large indoor industrial sites. Unfortunately, Calgary, their site is at capacity or over capacity already. The compostable bags are not breaking down as quickly as the town of Tabor and the compost contractor GFL would like. Because the bags don't break down quickly, they end up being picked up by high winds and littering neighboring properties, including farmland. If the bags are untouched by the wind, they break down so slowly compared to other compostable materials, the debris remains in the finished compost. So essentially, I'm not a compost expert, but the way I understand it is you need a very high temperature for these bags to break down. So in the indoor industrial sites like the one Calgary has, these bags do break down. But in the outdoor sites, like most compostable sites that are financially feasible for all of the communities, unless you're the size of Calgary, these bags aren't breaking down. So this is not just in southern Alberta. It sounds like this is across the nation. This is becoming a large issue. So any questions about the bags?
Councillor Chapman, and then Councillor Simpson.
Just a quick question on that. I know that at the Lethbridge landfill, they basically put like a topsoil on and kind of cover the landfill so all the debris doesn't blow away. Why wouldn't you think that the compost site would do the same thing so that their debris doesn't blow away?
It's not just the debris, it's once the bags are breaking down, when they mix, the way you compost is you use machinery to mix that compost. And as they're mixing it, those bags that aren't breaking down are blowing in the wind. I know I've talked to the contractor to come up with other solutions for this so we can maintain using these, like a wind fence, but that has already been explored and used, and it's still not effective. These bags just are not breaking down, even in the final compostable material.
Councillor Simpson.
Thank you, Your Worship. I can see this being a hard one for people not to use. Like, I know there's the paper bags, but of course they would leak immediately. Is there any other solution out there for it? Because I have a feeling just going for those bins that we gave out with filling them up with whatever, nobody's going to want to continue their composting without a bag, because now every time they have to clean that bin, because it would be really disgusting, right? So
We are researching other options, but paper bag has been the option that's been presented to us and the other communities that impacted right now. Spencer may have some more ideas about this.
Go ahead, Spencer.
Thank you, Mayor. Through to Councillor Simpson. We have explored the paper bag option. There are 2 companies that appear to have bags that are waterproof enough that they don't leak even after a fairly lengthy use. We've been testing them at the town office, for instance, recognizing that that's an office full of people that regularly compost and the bags turn over more quickly than they might in a residential setting. It's also worth recognizing the paper bags are more costly relative to how much each bag would cost. Later on in the report, there is a suggestion that if there's appetite for it, the staff could look into some kind of incentive program to try to maintain the community using composting in some way, and then coming back with what that might look like longer term.
Councillor Chapman.
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. Just further to Councillor Simpson, would it be helpful to have some form of education? Seems like that's kind of the ongoing theme for me tonight, is educating others, and a good video, showing the positive elements of how to compost, or the current status of composting in Coaldale. I think you might want to. It might be helpful for the community and the residents to sense that buy-in through a positive messaging.
Working with our communications team to get ahead of this and educate the public as quickly as possible. We'll be working on a video very shortly. Unfortunately, we had very short notice on this, as well as the other municipalities, so we're working with them and working with the experts in this field to explain this better and to break this down so we can educate the public as quickly and efficiently as possible. However, this does need to take effect in the bylaw to enable us to go ahead with these communications. So.
And Mayor, Thank you. Through to Councillor Chapman. And again, it's worth highlighting that this certainly isn't just a local issue. It's happening across the province and as Justin had mentioned, very likely across the country. So we can certainly look to what's already out there and see if we can piggyback on some of the other materials that may have been developed already in terms of the educational component, because it is such a pervasive issue with so many sites. It appears to be the case now.
Okay. Councillor Holm?
Avid compost person and blue bin person, et cetera, et cetera. I wonder if we should run the numbers to find out what is the cost difference between having a single dumping of black bin and put the green bins and blue bins away forever. Maybe there's a big savings to us actually, because we don't have garbage trucks coming and then recycling trucks coming and then green bin trucks coming and having that beat up our roads even more. You know, I'm totally against it, but I'd like to see that number, because I know that as soon as this came out, my email box got pretty full pretty quick by the neighbors all going, what is this about? Now I got to have my apple peels and everything else sitting in this green bin without a bag in it, and I got to wash this bin 5 times a week? No thanks. Take your green bin and so, and same thing happened when all of a sudden it was, sorry, no more glass products. No more other products can't go in the blue bin. All of a sudden it was the same thing. Why don't you take your blue bin and put it someplace? So maybe we should take a look and see what that number is.
Definitely research. It is a good question. And regarding industry changes, the industry in the recycling and organics community does change very regularly, and it has been more restrictive than it is in the past, so that we know the recyclables are actually being recycled. I think past recycling programs have been at fault for a lot of recyclables ending up in landfill, and I think that's one thing that is being more proactively looked at. So there is some kind of good news that's tied to these things. However, this bag will be a hard sell, and I agree.
I guess we really don't, this isn't really a luxury item. We either change the bylaw or we're not compliant with, you know, our contractors in this system, so I don't see any way around it.
Yes, that's right. Unfortunately, if we don't change this, our organics start going to the landfill at a much higher cost.
Kevin?
Through the chair to council, and the main reason why we didn't take this to council a few weeks sooner is that we were meeting with and looking for different alternatives with the contractor, because we just didn't take the answer that we were given at face value. We did push, we did meet, we did turn other rocks over to hopefully come here with an immediate solution at the same time as this bylaw amendment request. And unfortunately, there isn't an immediate solution, but that doesn't mean that we're not going to continue to turn different rocks over, especially in the context of the waste handling site and what that may look like, the discussions with Lethbridge County and the Waste Commission. So we're going to continue to look at these items in a much more global view of waste management in Coaldale. Unfortunately, we do have to make sure that we comply now, or as you know, Justin mentioned, we're going to pay the garbage tipping fee for all 3 streams of waste.
Okay, so we got a recommendation to change the bylaw and give 3 readings tonight, so. Councillor Chapman, you sponsor first reading? Questions? Call the question, all in favor? That's almost unanimous. Yeah, unanimous, okay. Second reading. Councillor Simpson, all in favor? Okay. Unanimous consent. Counselor Pauls? All in favor? And that's unanimous. Counselor Chapman moves third and final reading. All in favor? Okay. That's unanimous or opposed, I guess? Okay, we have Counselor Holm opposed. All right. Now, I think I'm confident that we're at 7.1, so Spencer.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mayor. Lana, if you could go to the second to last schematic for this item. So effectively, while we're getting to that image, the body of the report provides a background that effectively indicates the developer for Cottonwood Estates has made a request to the town after informal discussions starting from last year to make a very small adjustment to the municipal reserve property that encompasses the stormwater pond in the southeast of the Cottonwood community. That would equal about 0.05 acres of municipal reserve being taken out of the reserve designation and adjusted into what's going to end up being Lot 40. If you could go down just a little ways, Lana. Perfect, thank you. So this doesn't show a lot of detail. The next image will show more detail, but we're just trying to show context for where the area in question is. And what's happened is there's been a portion of the MR lot that takes up the pond, the storm pond, that ends in a bit of a point behind a couple of lots. So Lena, if you could go to the next image now. Perfect. So what will end up becoming Lot 40 in the last phase of subdivision in the Cottonwood neighborhood. Currently, the way it's designed, it doesn't have access to Range Road 202A for any kind of access to the rear of the lot. And that's fine, that's the way it's been designed. This is as per the area structure plan. But what the developer is requesting is the yellow area, which is approximately 0.05 acres, be taken out of the municipal reserve designation and added to Lot 40 to effectively allow for rear lot access, which makes the lot more desirable. And on the town side, it removes a potential maintenance issue with this image is a little bit skewed, but the MR lot in that corner comes to a fairly tight point, which can become problematic from a weed and maintenance issue. So it does serve two purposes in that sense. And then the other thing to note is the Cottonwood neighborhood is over-dedicated for municipal reserve, even if we account for the fact that municipal reserve, according to the MGA, is typically only taken for anything above the high water line of a storm catchment area. So if we account for all of those factors, what we end up with is the developer started with about 100 and, well, I'll have to look it up in the report, but just shy of a full quarter section. And we end up with still over 10% dedication once the final phase of subdivision is completed. So there's more green space or more public municipal reserve than we would be able to take as a municipality from the development. That was done on purpose as a part of the amenities of the neighborhood. And this change that's requested doesn't materially change that 10% of the entire developable area being municipal reserve. I should note from a process perspective, what I'm presenting tonight is really just for an informal approval from council to proceed with the idea that when this all goes to subdivision, which is the only point at which land titles would accept the removal of the municipal reserve designation, all of the changes required to make this request happen would occur at the formal subdivision of that last phase of development or subdivision in Cottonwood. So really at this point it's a heads up to council and a request to allow staff to proceed with the understanding that this change would be able to be made at the time of subdivision. And then the final caveat to that is recognizing that subdivision is under the authority of the Municipal Planning Commission. So you do, as council, have a part in the process in that you have to hold a public hearing and approve of the removal of the municipal reserve designation. However, the change to the lot configuration would happen through a approval of the Municipal Planning Commission. So at this time, that's all I had to present on this, and I'd be happy to field any questions that council may have.
Questions, Mr. Spencer? Councillor Chapman, are you?
Just reading again, maybe just reaffirm with me, then land titles would be okay with this little breakdown, or like it's something that you had written in there that that it might be an issue?
Right, so through the chair to Councillor Chapman, the issue that I was pointing out was that land titles, at the time of the writing of the report, hadn't been able to get back to me regarding whether they would allow the removal of an MR designation on a partial piece of a lot versus once it's been subdivided and we have a registered plan ready to be approved by land titles. So we've been in contact with land titles and the developer at this point, and everybody's aware that the actual change to everything to make this work would occur at the time of subdivision approval and not today based on a partial piece of the lot being re-designated from MR to something else.
So if we happen to approve this, does that bias the decision of MPC in any way? Like, is this a chicken and an egg or a cart before the horse kind of a thing? And
Excellent question, Mayor. So if I may, I'll just read the recommendation out verbatim. It's a little bit lengthy, but it should answer that question. So the recommendation would be that Council approve administration to proceed with the processes required to remove the MR designation from that portion of the lands legally described as Lot 51 MR, Block 1, Plan 1911196, as identified on the attached sketch, with recognition for the fact that the exact area will be determined by the surveyed sketch submitted to the town, and recognizing the actual process of removing the designation would occur in the future to meet all requirements of the MGA. And that's in recognition that the authority of council as a part of this bigger discussion ends before subdivision is actually contemplated.
so it'd be more appropriate to deal with the full recommendation than
Yes, sir.
Councillor Chapman? Okay, Councillor Chapman moves. The recommendation is stated. Any discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All in favor? Okay, and that's unanimous. Okay. And we're going down to item 10.1. Councillor Holm?
I'd like to move that we send Mr. Van Ryan letters stating that we have seen his letters and that we've reviewed them, and especially for the letter dated November the 4th. I'd like it added into your letter back to him that it is not council's policy to get into discussions around different allegations by citizens of Coaldale in a public forum, but we take their allegations seriously and we talk to them individually about different matters. I believe that is what has been done with Mr. Weir in the past, and I think that's would be what we would do with any citizen who has different questions or allegations against the town, that we would want to talk with them individually, not in a public forum.
And not through a third party.
That's right. That's what I mean by public. I don't want it on social media or through the media or anything else, that it would be one-on-one.
Okay, so we have a motion by Councillor Holm. Discussion? Councillor
Thank you,
Simpson?
Worship. Another thing I would like added from the November 17th letter, there has been many inaccuracies from themselves, so I would like that included, that we would please ask them to refrain from spreading incorrect and misleading information like they have stated in there. I would like them us to send a letter asking them to stop that. So
do you accept that as friendly then on your, okay. And then just wondering if it would be appropriate to just clarify that in today's democratic world, we respect the process that they're underway, but also they have to respect that it's a duty of council to engage with citizens as well. I think it's not, I think it's unreasonable for having an expectation that council wouldn't engage on the topics either, so. Okay, so you accept that as friendly? Okay, we have the motion from council. Any discussion? All in favor? Yes, carried. And so we're at the end of the open session. Can I get a motion to go into closed session? Councillor Simpson moves that we go into closed session. All in favor? Okay, that's carried. 9 o'clock, then in the council timeline as set by our policy. Councillor Holm, all in favor? Okay, and then Councillor Simpson moves us into closed session. All in favor? Okay. Bio break.